This conference will now be recorded.
All right, good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you to our coming to our final town meeting information session, especially early on a Saturday morning. Before we get started, I'm just going to actually turn it over to Ann Haley, who is one of our 150th committee volunteers, for a quick update on some exciting upcoming 150 events. Ann, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming out. I just wanted to let you know that we're having a tribute to our veterans. It will be May 22nd. And what I'm here to ask you today is that if you have a family member or if you are a veteran, if you would please contact me through my Norwood government email address. It's ahaley@norwoodma.gov. And you would also be able to find some information on our website for the 150th anniversary. It's norwoodma150.gov. And what we're looking for is some pictures, a story about the veteran who is a family member or a friend, or if you are the veteran, if you want to tell your story and send us some pictures. This is going to be an all-day event on May 22nd with storyboards that some of our kids from the Coakley Middle School will make up for us, and some Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts will be involved. So it's all a family thing. We will have these storyboards displayed. We have some puppies coming from the American vet dogs, and some music and reenactors. So it should be a fun day, but we need you who are, I am sure, very proud of our veterans to give us the information for the storyboard. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. Thank you for all your work on the 150th. We're almost there. We're almost
Halfway.
We are not even halfway through the year yet. All right. Good morning, everyone. We're going to have a similar format today to the one we've had the last few days. We're going to go through our special town meeting warrant. We're actually going to start with our Community Preservation Act articles, which are on the annual warrant. We'll go through each article. We'll give a brief explanation, and there'll be a chance to ask any questions, and then we'll do a wrap up with any questions at the end as well. We're going to actually start off with our Community Preservation Act articles, and Joe Greeley from the Community Preservation Act Committee is going to go through that presentation with you. For those of you who don't know, the CPA Act was passed about 7 years ago in Norwood, 6 years ago. It's a property tax surcharge that's matched to some degree by funds from the Registry of Deeds throughout the state. And those funds have to be spent in certain specific areas. It goes through a process. There's a committee that evaluates the project, town approval, and then ultimately to town meeting for approval. So Joe, the floor is yours. And for those of you who are joining us remotely, if you have a question, if you want to just unmute and grab our attention in case we can't monitor the chat at the same time since our backs are turned. I can do the slides if you want. I'm proficient at it.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, all. Thank you for coming out, and thank you at home or outside the building somewhere, wherever you are. I'm Joe Greeley. I'm a member of the Community Preservation Committee. Our committee, excuse me, so the town approved, as Tony said, the town approved the Community Preservation Act in 2017. 2018 was the first year that revenue was collected. And essentially, there's two sources of revenue. The first is a local surcharge. So all of you who are lucky enough to get a real estate tax bill in the mail, there is a line item on the real estate tax bill that says community preservation surcharge. And essentially, it's 1% of your tax bill. It's not 1% of your property tax. It's 1% of your tax bill. So it's and that 1% was voted by the voters. The percentage was voted and adopted by the voters of the town. There's 9 of us on the committee. We have 4 of our members are appointed from various boards, like the Conservation Commission and various other boards as representatives of those boards. And then we've got 5 at-large members that are appointed. Patty Starr is the chair of our committee, but she's out of town this weekend. So luckily for her, she's spending some good quality family time. So she went to the bench and she invited me and requested that I give this presentation. So I'll try to make it brief and certainly get, I think it's more important, not only the presentation, but just to try to get some feedback and, answer some questions and just present where we are with this process. So there's the Community Preservation Act was adopted by the state of Massachusetts. All the voters in Massachusetts adopted it back in 2000, year 2000. So it took us 17 years to review it and propose it to town meeting and to the voters of the town. But it's, you'll see I've got some information as to how much we've collected in specific projects that we've got underway and have been completed. Because it's a state act and not a local act, there are definitely restrictions and limitations and opportunities in the act. One of the main features of it, the reason it was created by the state at the state level was because of Proposition 2.5, the available funds from every municipality were being channeled towards the, what some people see as the priorities, school, general operations of the town. And because of competing demands and growing expenses, what they found was that many municipalities were reducing the amount of money that they spend in specific areas and focusing on the priorities that they saw in their communities. So the Community Preservation Act was created to fund 3 specific areas and only those 3 specific areas. It's historical resources. I'll define these a little bit better as we progress. Historical resources, community housing, and open space and recreational use of land. So, and again, the state act is very specific as to how those 3 areas can be treated. As I said, the local surcharge, I don't think I finished that thought. The local surcharge is based on real estate taxes. That's the main source of our funds. And then in addition to that, there's also a state match. And the state match money comes from revenue that's collected at the county level for things like registering deeds and other filings that are done at the county level. So they pool that money, they segregate a certain portion, and then they distribute that. It's only distributed to the cities and towns that participate in the Community Preservation Act. So each one of our town meetings, each one of the annual town meetings, we have 3 articles. We have come once at a special town meeting a few years ago, but primarily most of our work is geared towards the May town meeting. We have 3 articles. The first article accepts and allocates the new money. So if you think of every year we all get a tax bill, a real estate tax bill. So a portion of that tax bill is directed towards the Community Preservation Fund. And so one of the first article, the first article that we present to town meeting is the acceptance and the distribution of that. And the distribution is easy because again, it's directed by the state as far as how that money can be allocated. So this year, Article 6 takes the revenue, and then the next slide shows you how much, but the famous pie chart, those 3 areas, historical resources, community housing, and open space and recreational use of land. According to the state, we have to allocate at least 10% of the revenue to those 3 areas, each 10% each. There's another 5% that can go back that is allocated for administrative use. We could have administrative assistance, clerical work, stenography. We could also use that money for title searches. Like if we were considering purchasing land, we could use some of that administrative funds as like a title search on a piece of property, deed registrations, things like that. So that's up to 5%. The other 3 areas, the 10%, we can go over the 10%, but the 5% administrative is a cap. We can't exceed that. And then the rest of the money goes into what's called an undesignated, or the remaining Community Preservation Fund. So this year, excuse me, this year in Article 6, and This is Article 6 on the annual, not on the special. So Article 6 this year, we have forecast, the town hall has given us a projection of how much locally we'll see in revenue. So it's just over the top line, $764,000. So if you think of what you've seen so far as the annual budget, you know, we're a much smaller piece of the pie as far as the collections of revenue in the town. So we'll collect over $700,000 in local money, and the state has already estimated that their match will be at a percentage that will bring us in another $260,000. So this is the first year since our implementation of the CPA activity that we're up over $1 million in revenue. The appropriation, so again, Article 6 accepts the money into the fund, and then it divides it into the buckets, if you will. So open space, historical resources, and community housing is just over $100,000. So that will be presented in Article 6, as will be the 5% for administrative and operating expenses, just over $50,000. And then the rest of the money, over $600,000 will go into that undesignated pool. And I'll get to the use of those. So once the money goes into those 3 specific areas, it has to stay there. We can't mix and match. That money has to stay in those 3 specific areas until someone else comes forward and presents a project, and we vet it and ultimately present it to town meeting. Article 7 is a little bit different, but there's some amount of overlap with 6. The administrative money is specific to the year FY23. So not only do we accept the money into that administrative fund, but we ask town meeting to approve the appropriation of that, which means we can spend it on administrative expenses right away. We don't have to come back to town meeting. And we do, as I said, we do have expenses, clerical and admin, et cetera. So that amount is $51,000 will be presented to town meeting. Ultimately, town meeting either approves or doesn't approve this whole thing. Town meeting is the governing body in this instance. So the Community Preservation Committee we spend all year reviewing project proposals, and we bundle it up and present it to town meeting, but ultimately it's you town meeting members that approve it. Let's see, recommending, go back one if you could. I didn't mention that, but so as opposed to the money going into the 10% reserves, any money that's not spent out of the admin reserve goes right back into the undesignated for us to use it again. So, you know, we do monitor, obviously we monitor that spending, and we try to limit what goes in. The majority over the last couple of years, since we've begun, the majority of the money, like if it was 50,000, at least 35,000 has gone back into the undesignated fund. So we try to monitor that and limit that as much as possible. So thank you. Article 8 is, so Article 6 accepts the money and divides it. Article 7 likewise divides it, but it's specific to the admin expense. Article 8 is where we present the projects to town meeting for consideration. So this year we've got 6 projects for approval. There's actually some, I laid them out and you can pick them up afterwards. There's a page on each one of the projects that provides a little bit more information in the back corner over there. The way that, again, we're guided by the state as far as the structure of this is concerned. So all year long, excuse me, so all year long, we prepare, this is basically the final exam, if you will, for us, is the May town meeting. We have a window that opens in the month of November, during which time people can come to us with a project proposal. We'll spend the next couple of months just reviewing that project, interviewing people, the proponents, and just to try to fine tune the project, help them to fine tune the project. And then ultimately we'll bundle up the project and present it to town meeting. In this case, in this year, we actually had 2 other projects that came to us, but they were, one, we voted not to bring it forward to town meeting because we thought it still needed a little more work. We didn't say no, we just said not now. And here's some other ideas that we've asked them and suggested they come back. So we try to filter those project proposals. We've actually, 2 years ago, we had a project come to us and it was a great project, but we said, let's take it a little bit further. This is actually the work behind the Balsh and the Elliott Field. And we actually said, let's take it a little bit further and let's put an ADA ramp so that people can get to that lower field behind the Balsh. So we try to, it's not our responsibility, nor can we as a body bring a project forward. Like it's the community that brings projects forward, but we can guide and filter and tweak and kick the tires and, just work with the proponents to try to make it a better project and make it as good a project as we can. For every project, and again, this is guided by the state. For each project, town meeting may approve the project as recommended, approve the project at a reduced funding amount, so you can scale it back if town meeting so desires, or reject it. Reject it outright. But what town meeting can't do, and this again is guided by the state, town meeting can't increase the project. You can't say, okay, well, if you're gonna build this, let's build that. There's a limitation by the state that says we can't, in that manner, we can't increase the project scope. What we can do is suggest that increase as like a phase 2 of let's work to come back at the next town meeting. So, Kevin, yes.
The one quick one.
Yeah.
If we can reduce the amount, can we then, if there's a cap someplace, can we then say line item A, we want to reduce it by 50,000, and then on line item 4, increase that number by 50,000, and it still balances?
I think the one thing is the money, the funds. And then the other thing is the project itself. So within reason, you could, somebody from town meeting could make a recommendation, but if obviously if it's a recommendation that town meeting considers, A, if it's in line with the state, and B, if it's something that town meeting, votes on to adopt it as an amendment, we could do that. But the downside or the caveat there is, like the project proposal is, it works as it is. So you wouldn't be able to make a change that significantly alters the concept of the project, right? So if in the case of that ADA ramp that I mentioned at the Elliott Field, if we said, take that ramp and move it over here, and there might be some expenses, it moved from line item A to B, then that should be fine as long as it doesn't offend some other part of that. But if you said, turn this ramp into, 5 sets of stairs and make it a little bit different, and then it basically distorts the intent of the project, and it may jeopardize the project success, right? So we've spent, not only have we spent, but the project proponents have spent months or more kind of fine tuning the structure of the project as proposed, right? So anything, please do. And the more feedback and questions, the better. But, sometimes if we want to make a change, it's gonna, upset the apple cart. So feel free to do that. And we're all ears. We know what we know, and we don't know much more. One other thing, if I could, just let me get through this bullet. Town meeting may not increase, we just said that, may not increase the CPA funding recommendation for any project, and may not appropriate money for any project not recommended, right? So somebody can't come forward on town meeting floor and recommend a totally new project because of the cycle that the state requires that we follow. So, yes.
You say that each article is going to be presented as a separate article, like the 8.1, 8.2.
Right.
Each project will be a separate
motion.
Yep, so we've got separate motions, and what a great way to lead into my next slide. Yes.
What happens? Can they come back? What's the
So yes, the state says town meeting is the ultimate governing body, and it's up to town meeting. So if town meeting says we don't like this for whatever reason, then certainly town meeting can reject it. But what's equally important, or maybe more important for us to know, for us being the committee and the proponent, is we certainly want to know why. Because then we go back and we kind of huddle again after town meeting. We say, okay, these worked, this one didn't work, so it was rejected. So let's focus on this and try to respond to the reason. If it was rejected, let's find, we certainly want to know why. And then we'll go back and say, in order to satisfy that concern, can we do X, Y, and Z? And the answer could certainly be no. Like everybody wants a dog park in town. I said it. I said the words dog park, right? But and again, it's not up to us. I don't even own a dog yet, but it's not up to us to propose a dog park. But if somebody came forward, it is an available way, project and to spend money on because it falls under one of the categories. But if somebody proposed it and then we in turn proposed it, but it was rejected at town meeting, then we need to say, okay, well, somebody didn't like the location, or we need to know how to proceed from there. So yes, town meeting can do that, can reject it, but what's equally important is what's next, like what happens next. So yes.
The undesignated funds, do they accrue every year, or do they, if they're not used, do they go back to the state?
So the good news is once we have it, we have it. It does not go back to the state. There is some movement between the accounts, but like for instance, when money goes into the historical resources, that reserve fund, the only way for that money to come out of that account is for us to propose to spend. So it doesn't go back into undesignated, and nor does it go back to the state. The administrative account closes out every year, so that money goes back into the undesignated account. But those three, the big three, the historic, housing, and recreation and open space, that money stays there and it just keeps rolling forward, hopefully increasing over time. We'll get to that slide too. Thank you. So nothing goes back to the state. All this money is it's in the bank, or it's in the bank. It's earning interest. So there are other gains to be had. The other thing, like if you have a real estate tax and you file for an abatement, so the real estate tax creates a surcharge, and the abatement, if you're successful in your abatement, it reduces that money. Like the town doesn't take the money in, so the money doesn't flow to the CPA fund. So there's some amount of flow back and forth. Good. Okay. Yeah.
Do you have a slide that's going to show us how much is in each of those buckets? I can wait.
Nope. Funny you should ask. So we'll just get through the 6 projects first. The last slide we have answers your question. If you can sit on the edge of your chair for a few minutes. So we have 6 projects, and again, all of the projects have to be within those confines of those reserves. Excuse me. The first project, and again, to the question of will we do these as individual motions. So motion number 1, and I think this is in this order. Motion number 1 is to create what is being called a regional housing services organization. And what that does is the proposal is for the town of Norwood to join forces with a couple of the surrounding towns. Canton is one. And what we intend to do, or what the project intends to do, is create a housing services organization that could coordinate with other towns to accomplish things like monitor. I'll just read these first, but I'll throw in a couple more. RHSO is Regional Housing Services Organization. So the RHSO can monitor existing affordable housing restrictions and provide subject matter on expertise on housing matters. So affordable housing, veterans housing. One of the things that really piqued my interest was for this group could act in a way that they take an inventory basically and provide an inventory of available affordable housing, veterans housing, things like that, that if someone were to be moving in, either moving into the area and they were interested in finding specific housing types, or if someone lived in the area and they were looking for affordable or veterans housing, then they could come to this group, and this group would make that information available. The regional approach allows access to specialized housing while sharing the cost with other communities. So this is basically Norwood's, the $10,000 that's being proposed is Norwood's share of that group, that organization. The other communities will likewise own a share, if you will. And then it becomes regional. And if one town thinks that some project that they worked on is successful, then they could roll that out and we can all kind of take it and run with it and basically, make it more available to the community as a whole. So that's a $10,000. So this motion is for the first year of this project to create this organization. So we already have, the proponent already has buy-in from the other communities. Yeah.
All right, so if you're talking about specialized housing services in conjunction with a number of other towns, we're looking at one specific building or whatever, and these towns all use it?
No, so it's more of a service contract is the way to think about it. An example is if we wanted to do a low-income loan program or a first-time home buyer program, the amount of paperwork that comes with something like that is immense. If you think about how much paperwork your own mortgage took, we're basically joining with other towns to be able to sort of purchase a service that can handle that for us. That's all it is. It's not going to be a physical location. It may be a person, it may be part of a person, it may end up being a firm, but the organization provides those services because even at $1 million a year, even if we spend all of it on affordable housing, there's only so much you could do. And maybe we give out 6 grants in a year, but I can tell you 6 housing grants leads to an immense amount of paperwork. We've run community development programs in the past where we've gotten community development block grants. Those have a 20-year time run out on the loan versus looking at a lien on the mortgage, and we do discharges 20 years later. So it's really us sort of purchasing a service to be able to do more housing programs in the future. Good. Yeah, a couple questions.
Oh, sorry.
Rachel, then.
First of all, thank you so much, and everything that you personally do, Joe, and the commission. I enjoy it. I don't take advantage of it in other countries I should, but I know there's even more out there. Thank you. On this particular one, is this really envisioning more like specific individuals connecting them with housing, or is it also envisioned, I know this is the first year rollout, is it also envisioned to provide guidance to the town with respect to zoning and affordable housing, especially the new section 3A zoning, MPA community requirement? And maybe it's hard to answer because that doesn't even exist yet, but what are we envisioning about the specific services?
It's more that administrative help for any local housing related programs that we want to do. There's a lot of communities that use their CPA money for simple things like deed restrictions. But again, if you think of a first time home buyers program, any kind of low income housing assistance, there's a lot of administrative work. It's really to provide that additional administrative support. If we had a really big program, if we were spending $5, $7, $8 million a year, we could probably just hire our own staff and do it internally. But this is really us tying with communities where we might give out 3 grants in a year, 2 years down the road, and then even helping develop those programs. We've looked at doing like an affordable housing trust in the past. So this would be able to actually handle some of the administrative work if we ended up setting up an affordable housing trust.
And what are the other towns you mentioned, Canton? What are the other towns that are?
Like something in there for you, sweetheart.
No, I don't think you have to.
If we can mute whoever unmuted, and then if Sarah is on the line, if she could just give us the list of proposed towns. Just 1 second, everyone. Oh, sorry.
We have a housing authority that takes care of this, and an executive director.
Sarah, are you on the call?
I sure am.
Just let us know what other.
Yes, so off the top of my head, I know Hopkinton is our lead community on this project. We have, they're the ones who kind of like host and manage the the contract with whatever individual that we're working with. We also have Sharon, and we have, I believe, Bellingham. And sorry, I'm looking for my list here. There's about eight communities that are participating, but they're all in our area.
Thank you, Sarah.
I can follow up in a minute, but they're all similar towns that are similarly sized to ours, who have similar amounts of affordable housing in their communities. They're comparable communities to Norwood in terms of population and parking.
Thank you, Sarah. Sarah is our assistant town planner. There's a number of these RHSO-like organizations throughout the state. I know Mike, our assistant manager, worked with one up in the town of Bedford. They had 5 or 6 towns together, and it's just really sharing the complex amount of the work that goes with administering any kind of housing programs. And we have
Can you see if I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Ed had a question about, is this contract a one-time investment? If not, what is the cost, subsequent cost per year? So this is for the first year. We would sort of decide each year going in how much service we want to purchase. If we end up having a lot of programs and we end up having a lot of need, that cost could go up. We could decide every year that, they're sort of billing us for 2 hours of work, and maybe it's not as complicated as we thought, or we're not doing as many housing programs as we thought. And then we end up doing it in-house or doing it on our own. But it's 1 year. There's no commitment beyond this year.
Is that and we will keep your name and address for future reference on our committee. So thank you very much. Thank you.
So there's no commitment beyond this year, but if we wanted to do it beyond this year, would the money come out of CPA funds? Would you be trying to do that, or would it go into the town?
It's sort of all determine a decision. I mean, CPA was supposed to, the whole goal of the CPA when the state came up with it about 20 years ago was to fund some things that may be harder to fund in the general fund budget and that may not be able to fit within that 2.5% cap. So we'd have to look at it. Some towns fund full-time housing planners out of it. They found full-time land use planners out of it. That'll sort of be a decision year to year if this is something we're always going to do. Maybe we do put it in the operating budget, but that'll come into conflict with anything else that we may want in the operating budget. So the DPW may say, well, I want 2 more seasonal employees this year to help keep downtown cleaner. Great, let's do that. Wait, or do we do this? So I think it'll sort of be an annual decision as to how we want to allocate it. And that's always one of the challenges with CPA is if you want to keep your money free, so every year you can kind of pick and choose different things, that's good. But that sort of denies you the opportunity to build some consistency or to do one big project. So it's a catch-22.
Johnny, can I follow up on that one?
Sure.
So just because I promised, I would look it up. The participating communities are Bellingham, Medfield, Milton, Sharon, Randolph, and Rentham. Canton actually was involved in forming this early on, but they did drop out at some point in the process. The Board of Selectmen have signed an intermunicipal agreement to participate in this RHSO. That's the contract that commits us towards this. It's a 3-year contract initially, but I want to make clear because this has come up before and it's a really good question. There are provisions in that contract that would allow for us to step out of the RHSO, if we were in a position where, first of all, we could not fund it anymore, or we had some pretty serious misgivings where we weren't getting, the bang for our buck here. So there isn't a mechanism for us to back out. The $10,000 is for the first year of funding. That's for the core services. Community Preservation Act funding is commonly used by communities who participate in RHSOs to fund annually, but again, that would be a new request every year, at which point the CPC and town meeting could reevaluate whether or not they wanted to expend the funds on this group.
Good morning. It's important to note that good morning. It's important to note that in the 5 years that the town has had the Community Preservation Act, we haven't spent any of the affordable housing money. This program will enable us to look at some different programs that we could establish to help affordable housing, create affordable housing with people, things like first-time home buyers or veterans housing. So we've had this money added to for 5 years. We haven't really done anything in terms of proactively promoting affordable housing in the town. And this is the first step forward to begin that process.
Thank you, Paul. That's Paul Halkiotis, our Planning and Economic Development Director. Other questions on, we'll call it motion one?
And this project, as well as the next one, were presented by the Planning and Economic Development Committee. So they're the proponent of these projects, and they will always, they own it, basically, if town meeting approves it.
Sure, thank you. Tony Esco asked a question, is this redundant with our own housing authority? The answer is no. The housing authority is its own complete separate entity. What housing authorities do is they own and manage public housing. That's what they do. So we have about 550 units of public housing, that is senior and low income housing in Norwood. That is all managed by the housing authority, which is its entity. They're not necessarily responsible for other programs in the community that are not related to the public housing that they manage. Their funds are federally managed funds.
We could, CPA, the housing authority could, as an entity, come to the Community Preservation Committee with a proposal, but if they so desired, but this is not, this is totally unrelated to that. So, good. Any other questions? Good. So that was motion one.
That's the only one we're gonna, oh, there we go. There we go.
Okay. So motion number two, under Article 8, it proposes that that we use $20,000 out of the community preservation account from the housing reserve to fund these micro grants that will address expiring affordable deed restrictions. So that in our community, there are a number of deed restrictions, and essentially, if you think of, I don't know, like if you have an easement over your property, that easement that agreement, A, it's in writing and it's registered, but B, it may have an expiration date. So that's just another example of a different type of contract between the homeowner and the town. So in this case, there are similar deed restrictions that are attached to the deed and the property that make it affordable. But those affordable restrictions have an expiration date. So one of the aspects of this proposal is to create a fund that will allow the town to continually, spend part of that money to renegotiate, if you will, or to extend those restrictions. So there are a number of restrictions that are already in place, but this proposes that some of the money out of the community preservation accounts fund that. The second aspect of this grant to be limited to properties currently on the subsidized housing inventory. So likewise, just as there are agreements for deed restrictions, affordable deed restrictions, there's also subsidized housing that the town participates in and has agreements with the homeowners. So in this case, these would be grants. To create, either to create or amend and extend subsidized housing agreements. And then the third aspect of this is to proposal is intended to preserve low density affordable housing in perpetuity. So that perpetuity, again, if something expires, it has the risk of falling off the list of affordable housing. It's ultimately, part of it is ultimately related to the 1.5% 40B thresholds that we're trying to maintain. So this would create a fund that would be available to be spent to extend some of either create or extend some of those existing contracts. This one, again, is, as I said, this is presented by the Planning and Economic Development Department, and they would monitor it and manage it once it's been created.
Two, does that include Section 8 housing if there's a unit or units?
No, it doesn't. Let me just take a quick moment to explain Section 8, how it works and how that's different from this. Section 8 is a voucher program. There's no such thing as Section 8 housing. People think they see an apartment block and say, oh, that's all Section 8. Section 8 is a federal voucher program. You could own a mansion and have a family live there, and they could pay with a Section 8 voucher. They'd only pay whatever the federal government pays for a 2 or 3 bedroom family. So if your mansion is worth $100 million or something like that, you're only going to get whatever the federal government says it is. But that voucher program is interchangeable So I could rent your house and with a Section 8 voucher, and then I could go rent your house with a Section 8 voucher. So that moves around. Deed restrictions are, most of them are from older affordable programs. Now, when you build an apartment complex in Massachusetts, for instance, or sometimes a smaller housing development, it's a little bit more simple. There's usually this is what's the affordable housing. These are usually condo units that over time projects have been built. In one or two, there was funds available 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago to keep a couple of them affordable for a period of time. So you pay for that deed restriction to keep that unit affordable.
All right, my second question is the word affordable.
Yeah.
What is the definition of affordable? Or is it the same old definition of art?
So every program is always a little different. It's usually a percentage of the area median income. For us, that's I think 90-something thousand dollars. So it's anything less than 80% of that. So you can be making $60,000 a year and living in some form of subsidized housing. Programs are different, they have different amounts, and the level of that subsidy is there. But we tend to have a perception that there's sort of just free housing out there, and there's not. You can make $60,000 a year and qualify for some sort of free housing, or I should say some sort of subsidized housing. I know a couple of years ago at Upland Woods, for instance, the affordable units were still about $1,100 a month. So that's affordable only in relation to the total rent of the property, but people think, oh, it's affordable, so it must be $100 a month. That's certainly not the case. And we don't really get to determine that ourselves. So I know a couple of years ago, the planning department had a flyer with the affordable rates for, I think, the Regal, the print loft. And I remember looking at it and saying, oh, those are actually decent rents. And somebody says, those are the affordable rents. That's why they look decent. So good question.
Sure.
Yeah.
Tony?
Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Our zoning bylaw has a definition of affordable housing, and that definition boils down to any units that can be included on the state's subsidized housing inventory.
So thank you for that even more confusing. Only a lawyer can define.
The definitions of the bylaw.
Yeah.
Okay.
We can
And
get
the
you
other
a copy.
47 different statutes that, choose to name it differently, but.
Jerry?
Question, when we use the word perpetuity, which is quite a word, by the way, does this mean that we're going to be seeing this ongoing? Will we see this again next year as a request? Because I'm assuming that there are things coming off more than just this one time.
So the $20,000 that's being requested is, there is a list of, there's a list of existing agreements that are in place. And B, the other piece of this is a potential to create new agreements. So the Planning and Economic Development Committee put their department, put their heads together and they said, what can we fund the pool with that is going to, in our estimation, will get us a couple of years, 2 to 3 years down the road? The answer to your question is we don't know exactly, like we being the department, but they tell us what they know. So we don't know exactly how long that 20,000 is going to last. It will almost certainly be the case that they will come back and request further money from CPA. It's not likely that this money could be funded from the operating budget, but that's, an alternative. But likely that we'll see this come back again once we get to we whittle down that $20,000 into some threshold. We'll say, okay, well, it's going to take us a year to work our way through town meeting and ultimately to town meeting. So when that reaches, I don't know, 7,000, 5,000, something like that, then they'll come back for more money. But this is the initiation of this concept. So I hate to say it, but I will say we don't exactly know. I'm not afraid to say that.
Can I clarify, Joe?
Yep, please, Sarah.
Sure. So this is actually a fairly, this expense is fairly limited in its scope. The vast majority of the units on our subsidized housing inventory, which for clarification is our central list of all affordable housing in our town that counts towards our requirements in Chapter 40B. The vast majority of that inventory is all deed restricted in perpetuity, meaning the restrictions don't expire. Those units and the deeds say that these must be affordable regardless of whether or not the property turns over to a new owner. It's kind of a forever situation. It used to be not that way. And so some of the older units on our housing inventory do have expiration. But it's a limited issue. We had 2 small developments that were set to expire this year. We've actually been able to make some progress in working with DHCD to extend the restrictions administratively, which obviously saves the town a little bit of money for those units. We have another round of units that's coming up in 2027 that it's never too early to start negotiating and working with the owners to see if we can extend. But beyond that, we don't have too many more that would expire. So I would say this is definitely limited. And it's something we haven't tried before, but negotiating with property owners to extend those restrictions is something that is commonly done in the state for these older style programs where the affordability wasn't guaranteed indefinitely.
Thanks, sir.
Are some of those units in apartment complexes?
So
Sarah?
affordable housing in the state and in Norwood is not restricted to multifamily housing. You can have affordable housing on this list that is home ownership. You can have housing types that are rentals. You can have them in large apartment complexes. You could have them in single family homes. You can have them in group homes for people with disabilities. So it's really a wide range of housing types that qualify for affordable housing. The thing that they have all in common is that they're made available to households who are at or below 80% of that area median income. The types of units that will be expiring in Norwood, or would if we didn't make an effort to try to stop it, those are usually smaller. I believe they're all rental units, but not in large complexes. We're talking about 6 units here, 9 units there. Nothing of the volume that I think people probably think of when they think of about affordable housing complexes being our really large multifamily developments.
And these are probably all at least 15 to 20 years old. So these aren't deed restrictions that expired 2 years ago that we're re-upping or anything like that. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks.
Other questions on?
Yeah, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Hi, Pat Ronan, District 7. So is it fair to say that the passage of Motion 1 would be helping the implementation of Motion 2? Would that, being part of the regional trust, would that help us with these restrictions?
Sarah, do you want to take that one? I don't know if we would be kicking this to the RHSO in time, but Sarah?
So the RHO is really available to help us with specialized housing services. Housing planning in general and housing monitoring is a pretty specialized skill set. The programs that allow for affordability in our state are extraordinarily complex. I have worked closely with them, and I know that it really takes a lot of skill and an investment of time to be able to manage them appropriately. I think that while the RHSO is available to us kind of as a consultant on any types of housing monitoring that we would need to be doing, I think in this case, we probably wouldn't rely on the RHSO as much, because this is really about engaging with property owners and the relationship that we have with them. And that's really something that locally, I think, our department has an ability to do in-house. But that's not a commitment of any kind, right? So if there were, if there was some assistance that we needed to look to our RHSO, our housing consultant, to help us research something or give us more guidance on perhaps best practices, what's been done elsewhere, give us other ideas to assist in this negotiation, that would absolutely be a resource for us. But I don't anticipate relying on them 100% to do this work.
Very helpful, thank you. And to follow up to that, and Mr. Halkiotis mentioned that there hasn't been any money spent out of the Community Housing Fund for CPA. is it fair to say that by joining this regional group, that would allow us to start actually spending money on projects instead of letting the money just sit there unused?
Absolutely. This will give us that sort of administrative framework to be able to go ahead and do that. There are programs that we would like to do, and without having that backup there, it's going to be very complicated to do. Related to that, Ms. Esco had asked a question earlier about, why wouldn't we just work with banks for a first-time home buyers program? And I want to clarify, I'm talking about down payment assistance for low to moderate income individuals purchasing a home, not just hey, how do I go through the process of finding a real estate agent and getting a mortgage? But those projects really can't happen unless we have this sort of administrative framework to be able to do it.
Just to give you an example to follow up on what Tony stated, just because you have the funding perhaps from a local bank or a trust to be able to assist, give assistance to income eligible families and households for affordable housing, the administrative obligations that surround actually making that program happen are the type of services that we would be looking to an RHSO to help us with. No affordable housing is distributed to any household without that household, for example, being screened for eligibility. And the screening requirements are fairly intense. To make sure that a household is income eligible, you're doing a 3-month look back on every cent of income from assets. Oftentimes you're verifying the assets themselves. You're doing documentation for, criminal records and right. So it's substantive. And so not only are you doing that work or perhaps, doing a lottery of all the people who are then qualified, but then there's monitoring to make sure that folks who live in these units continue to remain eligible. And then monitoring, to make sure that that was done properly when private properties are doing it themselves. So again, those administrative obligations kind of far exceed just the initial hurdle, which can be substantial, of like, where do we get this money to make this program happen? Actually running the program is really what we're talking about here with the RHSO.
Thank you so much.
Great questions, thank you. One of the things as far as the housing reserve, there has been a study that says when a municipality adopts CPA, housing is usually one of the last things that comes forward as far as proposals are concerned, because it, there's pent up demand in the other two areas, open space and historic restoration and such. But housing takes a lot of, there has to be a lot of not only call for it, but there has to be a management process in place to be able to address some of these, because they're very, as Sarah and Paul have just mentioned, they're very kind of, there's a lot of I's to be dotted, T's to be crossed. The fact that we weren't excited that from a CPA committee standpoint, we obviously noticed that housing was lagging. Paul and Sarah jumped in and said, okay, well, we absolutely need to do something. And these two programs would be a great way to launch other programs. So we're basically putting these things in place first, and they will absolutely lead to the generation of other ideas and other projects down the road. So again, if approved, once that's in place, if it is in place, the Department of Planning and Economic Development will manage these projects. So good. Thank you. Thanks. Okay. This is the third motion here.
I think my clicker's falling asleep. There we go.
Okay. So the town manager's office, and luckily we likewise have the town manager here for questions. But the town manager's office has proposed two historic restoration projects. One of this first one, motion 3. There is anybody who's walked the halls of town hall know that on the wall there's various petitions and renderings and photographs and maps and such. So one of those is and again, there is a picture. I don't think we have a picture of it actually in this presentation, but we should. We will next week. But one of these is the one that has bubbled to the top and has got the focus of the town manager's office. There is a rendering of town hall that is attributed to architect William G. Upham, and it depicts the design that was ultimately chosen. So I know you can't see this, but basically these are one of the handouts that's in the back of the room. But it's a view of town hall, what town hall could look like And ultimately, this is the design that was adopted. This $10,000 funding will support the professional repair and preservation of this watercolor that goes back to 1927, 1928. I think it was when the building was opened. Once restored and reframed, the drawing will continue to be on public display. So it is in need. It needs some TLC, and this is one of the acceptable uses of CPA funds, is doing historical, restorations and such. Sure. Yep. Questions on this? This is a $10,000 project. And then the next project. So likewise, Town Hall obviously is the receptacle and storage location for records, every record you can imagine, and then some. We currently, every year, and I should have brought one from last year, but every year the town puts out a town report, an annual report. And what is being proposed here again by the town manager's office is the utilization of $14,500 out of CPA fund to support the restoration and preservation of up to 13 volumes by a qualified conservator. These are the oldest records that oldest annual town meeting reports. This is an annual event, but these date back to the 1800s, and they're in poor condition and are at risk of disintegrating beyond repair. Since then, reports have been digitized and can be accessed. However, the town is committed to maintaining the original documents as well. So this is in parallel to the digitization of these records. So,
It's all really is. I mean, I have a full set in the manager's office right back from 1873, our first annual town report, all the way up till now. So we want to make sure, at least throughout the town, we preserve a couple of physical sets of our town reports. Even though they're digitized, at some point we wouldn't want to just take some of the old records and toss them out. This is sort of a great example, as along with the painting of what CPA was for, is these nice projects, things you want to do in the town, but take it out of the operating budget where somebody's worried that, I don't want 23 kids in my kid's classroom next year. It's like, well, we want to preserve pretty pictures and nice records. It's a balance to try to make sure you are preserving important things in the community. You'll probably see some articles like this every year as we look at what records we want to physically restore, make sure we're maintaining some physical copies of as well.
And this is as Tony said, this is a great example of, projects that wouldn't it be great if, or we need to do this because we're losing history. If there's water damage or something, anything that is impacted by the water, you'll lose forever. So what we want to do is retain this. But it's a great example, like this type of project could be proposed by a private, like in this case, it's being proposed by the town manager's office, but it could also be proposed by a private entity. Like I know one of the churches in town was actually the host of the first, and I just happen to know this, but the host of the first Boy Scout troop in the country. So they have a charter, they have the charter, which was signed by, I don't know if it was signed by Lord Baden-Powell, but it's, it goes back to day one of the Boy Scouts of America. And that document, I've been trying to prod them subtly, but that document is another one that it's the history of Norwood, and it's his historical record. And so in that case, that group, the organization, could come forward with a proposal if they so desire. So this type of preservation can be presented by basically anybody in the community, business organization, town manager, you name it. So another great use of CPA money. So, good. Article 4, I'm sorry, motion 4. Motion 5 is, so the town owns a piece of property that's at the intersection of Stern and Elliott, just down the hill from, if you picture coming down the hill from Norwood High School, Elliott Street, and at the intersection of Elliott and Stern. So this is it's roughly, the town has owned the 7,500 square foot parcel. So it's, it's a fairly small parcel, but it's right in the middle of a community, of a neighborhood. So the question of what do we do with this, came up, and the town owns many pieces of small property that, we don't want to sell them outright. We don't want to possibly adversely impact the neighborhood, especially. And it's the case that this was presented likewise by the Planning and Economic Development Department. But in this case, this would be a beautiful, the proposal is to turn this piece of property into a beautiful pocket park is what it's called. But it's essentially a neighborhood, it's a neighborhood resource, but not only limited to the neighborhood, obviously. But so the funds will be supported to the creation of the pocket park. On the town engaged in a planning process. There was a public hearing, at least one public hearing on future uses of the property. And the park option was the unanimous choice of those who participated in those hearings. The park was designed and will be installed by the DPW, allowing for cost savings. So some of these projects, if approved, we could actually manage ourselves. Some of them we have to go outside and hire contractors, but in this case, we think we could do much of the work or all the work, I'm not sure, all the work ourselves. One more point, this concept originated with David Hajar back 2 years ago or more, as in his role as on the board of selectmen. So, that's the genesis of this design of the product. So, in this information sheet, there's actually a map of the property. Essentially, if you think of the Hoyle Street.
East Hoyle in Washington, there's a little corner sort of park there with some benches and some stamped brick right near the hospital. That's probably what this will look like, a little bit greener because it's in a neighborhood.
Right now, it's a cut through. It's got vegetation on it. It's basically it's not used. It's underused. It's not used. And what this project proposes is to turn it into a resource for the neighborhoods.
It's a fairly dense the neighborhood there's fairly dense. Yeah, so. Questions?
Article 6 in the final article, the final project that the committee has proposed is this is the next phase, but the build out, if you will, of the riverfront park at St. Street. So a couple of years ago, town meeting, a community preservation motion was made to town meeting to purchase this land. This land was slated to be used, basically the vacant lot was slated to be totally cleared and for the use of storage of new vehicles, right? And it's right in the middle of similar to Stearns and Elliott, it's right in the middle of a neighborhood. So 2.5 years ago, the proposal was made and town meeting approved the purchase of it. Part of the proposal at that time, the town meeting approved, was the purchase of it to create a deed restriction, a conservation restriction that likewise designates the use of that land only for conservation, passive recreation purposes. And then the third part of that motion at that time was to create a design for a future park and based on that design, that project will come forward as phase 2. So that's a little bit of the history of the St. Street lot. But now this is phase 2 that's being presented at town meeting. So there's actually, I always hated the name the St. Street lot, but luckily the Board of Selectmen and the town manager have come forward and said we will, the name hasn't quite been finalized yet from what I understand, but we want to memorialize Bernie Cooper. So it'll become the Bernie Cooper Park, or that's what we're referring to it as. But as this as it progresses, it'll take on that name and lose the St. Street lot. It's a roughly 7 acre lot that was purchased in 2021. Plans for the park, and there is a full design. Again, we will bring a full almost life size, almost poster next week at town meeting. But one of the info sheet is a double-sided info sheet on this. Plans for the park include accessible trails, a nature play area, an outdoor classroom, interpretive signage, and other amenities. If you think of people who are familiar with that area, St. John, St. Paul, and St. Joseph are 3 of the streets in South Norwood. At the end of those streets, if you just kept going, you'd land in the Neponset River, but between the end of the neighborhood and the river is this 7 acre lot. It abuts the Elliott Field and the ball school, and it's also a 5-minute walk to Haas Pool and Dean property. So it's kind of perfectly situated in between a couple of areas. The outdoor classroom is, the folks at the Balch are already, they're really excited at the potential because they could bring a class of kids out and, meet flora and versus the fauna and all that kind of stuff. But so that's another potential of this. The full funding will be through a 50-50 split between CPA funds and free cash. So so this $805,000 that's being requested and proposed at town meeting is half of the money. The other half will also be presented and proposed at town meeting, but that money will come from free cash. So the project, it's the design of the project total, the gross amount is 1.6 million. So we're, again,
Hey, Joe, just to clarify what you're saying,
Sure.
it is going to be one motion
okay.
that's
Yep.
going to ask for both. So
Okay.
the motion will actually be for the 805 from CPA and the 805 from free cash.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. This just in. Thanks, Jen. Free cash, the project proponents applied for a number of grants. We'll talk about that in a second. And we've actually, but Holly and the Conservation Commission applied for a grant and have received conditional approval of a Land and Water Conservation Fund grant for $750,000. So the total project is 1.6 million minus 715,000. So so we have to do this in steps. So the 1.6 million has been split in half, 50 free cash, 50 CPA funds. When that, hopefully, knock on wood, hopefully that grant will continue in a good direction. And when that $715,000, which is reimbursable, when that comes back to us, then we'll split that money 50-50 as well. So it'll put the money back into free cash and put the money back into CPA. We just won't have to take out as much, basically. But it is reimbursable, which means we have to incur the expenses first. We, the town, have to incur the expenses first, which is why we're asking for the 1.6 million as opposed to the net. Question you had?
Oh, yeah, it's just a simple one. I don't always understand finance, so I just have to ask it. But the 805 would be more than the undistributed funds, plus the 10%. So would that extra money come from like an override?
So we have, we were trying to hold this till the end, just to get, one of the other slides, keep going. I think it might be the last one. Yep. Okay. So here's the question was asked before, how much money do we have today? How much with the new revenue, what's available, and then the funding. So in total, I'm going to jump ahead to chapter 4 and just go right to the bottom line. So after all this, after all the income, the revenue of just over $1 million and the spending proposed of $931,000, we started out with roughly 2.4 million. We're going to end up with something close to like 2.45 million. So it's we're essentially this year proposing to spend essentially the same number as we're taking in revenue. So the second to last column is the undesignated reserve column. So in that fund right now, with the new money that's with the money that's coming in, we'll have roughly $950,000. So we're proposing to spend 800 of that 950 out of that fund, not out of the. We could have spent some of the money from open space and recreation, but we just said, okay, let's take the whole thing and take it out of the unreserved fund. This is one of those. I'm biased, so I should have said it at the beginning. But this is one of those, just like the Stearns and Elliott Park. This is a chance to create. It's rare that you look at it's like a blank, a blank area, and what do you think is the best proposal, the best use of this land? Stearns and Elliott is perfect. We didn't want to impact the neighborhood. It's a great resource. It's anybody in the community, kids, seniors, whatever, carriages, it's perfect spot. And likewise, that's what this proposal is all about. So we can get to this money afterwards, but just to answer your question specifically about the Saint Street. So we will, we have, obviously we look at this, the Community Preservation Committee looks at the money every month, every one of our meetings. So we just kind of ride the flow, but we get a report from the Treasurer's Office and the Director of Finance office. So we, this is not our money, it's your money. So that's the way we treat it. So, any more questions about the Cooper lot? Yes, yes.
I did get two questions. One, how much money will be left in the CPA fund after these expenses? And my second question, I believe the state, maybe you were applying for it, does have a trails fund where they will reimburse the town, but the town has to spend first. Is the CPA going to apply, or the town going to apply for that?
We're 95% certain we're getting $700,000 from a combined federal state program. We're also hot on the trail of a state appropriation for this park as well that might reduce the cost to us to zero and let us do the third phase of it. So, but we were committed to going forward no matter what. So that 1.6 million, we're 95% certain is actually only going to be about 800,000, 900,000. So it's at this point 50% grant funded, but we do have to get the full appropriation. And your first question, there'll be about $2.4 million left in CPA if town meeting approves all of these projects every year. And the CPA fund, it's sort of, you want to build up a little bit of a balance so you have some flexibility, but the money's designed to go to projects. So it's always a balancing act between spending or keeping it in there. And we as a 1% community, some communities have a 2% surcharge, some have the full 3%. We'll see more of these projects where we're sort of saying, okay, half CPA and half town funds. I think we did that with the chapel was the third funds to finish it off.
I mentioned Holly Jones, but Holly's in the audience here. Holly's the conservation agent for the town.
Who's responsible for getting us that $700,000?
Yes, yes. Thank you, Holly. Any other questions about Cooper? Again, there's a double-sided information page there. The design work, I should say, the design work that has already been done was a result of, I think, three public hearings and at least 2, maybe 3 tours of the property and walkthroughs in the area. Some of you, I think, were there. So we had a lot of, it was great. We had a lot of community feedback. The project is being proposed, this project is being proposed by the Conservation Commission. So going forward, if it is approved, whether it's approved or not, the land itself will continue to be managed by the Conservation Commission. This project and the outcome, if approved, will likewise be managed by the Conservation Commission and the conservation agent. So, yeah.
Just a quick question. Where are those sheets that we can bring home with us?
In the back corner on the table. I'm sorry, I didn't.
Thank you.
I put them there and everybody came to this one. Good. Any questions? Good. So
I have a question about the Stearns and Elliott.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, please.
Oh, okay. Yeah, if I'm correct, that's like a small corner, which is not even as big as a house lot. And right now, I think it has a couple of trees and a bunch of grass. What would the $72,000 be spent on for a little tiny thing where you could just mow it and put a couple of benches down? I'm trying to understand why that would be so expensive.
Sure, a couple of things. One, to actually have a landscaping company work with the DPW to come in and clear some of that brush is pretty expensive. There's going to be some sort of brick plating down. I don't call it brick plating, but similar to the Stearns and the East Hoyle Park. And then, believe it or not, a bench is $2,000 or $3,000 for a proper bench. Anything that the DPW doesn't do in Massachusetts, we have to pay prevailing wage for all of the different labor that we use. So you might be able to hire somebody to mow your lawn for $20 an hour. If the prevailing wage rate for that is $35 or $40 an hour, we have to pay that. So we tend to have to pay a little bit more than you might be able to get sort of doing it as cheap as possible. We also have to make, believe it or not, even if it's a clear lot with some shrubbery and it's just a little bit of stone and a couple of benches, we have to make sure it's ADA compliant. It actually has to be designed by a landscape architect and an architect to make sure that we're meeting ADA compliance. So a municipal project almost always will cost more than you could do it for on your own because of some of those compliance, because we do have to pay prevailing wage to any contractors that we do use.
Okay, well, in the summary, in the motion 5 summary there, it says the park was designed and installed by Department of Public Works. So that's when you're talking about outside contractors and, additional ADA design compliance architect. That's not in the description, so that confused me.
Sorry about that.
Good. Thanks, Brian.
Is it really going to cost that much outside that it can't be done just by the DPW?
Correct. This is to be honest with you, if we had the DPW not involved, you'd probably be looking at double that cost. I think the East Hoyle Park, where there was an existing park, we just sort of went in and updated it, was probably about $40,000 or $50,000. We recently did this to the Little Lopey Ridge Park, which is right in that area. Same thing, to just put down that stone brick plating and to dig everything out and to replenish everything cost us about the same. This is a whole new lot where there's never been anything done. So to clear cut it, remove everything and go in, we're looking, if we didn't have the DPW working on it, it'd probably be about double this cost. The lot is not it's technically a buildable lot because the town took it in tax sale pre-zoning. So it's a pre-existing non-conforming lot. So the board could have sold it and a house could technically have been built there. But as you noted, it's a corner lot. It's an odd shaped lot. Wouldn't have been a very good place for a house.
Got it. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Great questions.
There are a lot of thought has gone into the design. There is a lot of planting to be done in the proposal. Part of the planting is to actually create a screen between the homes that abut it, just to try to segregate it, and so that, just to allow for some division between the park and the neighborhood. So,
Okay, that's nice to think of. Thank you.
Thank you. Just real briefly, there is a chart that's available. This is defined by the state as far as how the community preservation funds can be used. Certain things are all yes, like in order for the town to acquire open space land, anything of historical nature, recreation or housing, the answer is yes as far as acquiring that. Creating it means no, there's a no in there under historic. We can't create something historic, but we can, a couple of these projects propose the creation of open space and recreation, and likewise housing. So preserve, it's all yes. The whole concept of the Community Preservation Act is to assist with preserving. Support is, with the exception of housing, support is an absolute no, because once these projects, any of our projects are accepted and adopted by town meeting, everything after that, all expenses after that have to be incurred by the town and come out of the operating funds, unless there's like a phase 2 of the project. So somebody might come back and say, phase 1, phase 2, but any operating maintenance, mowing the lawn, resurfacing the deck, planting new trees or whatever, none of that can come from community preservation. And then rehabilitate, restore, there's a couple of caveats as far as that's concerned, but this again is defined by the state, so allowable uses of the funds. We got a next slide there if I could. So spending to date, we've spent roughly $2.8 million before these proposals out of the community preservation funds. When I say we, I mean all of us, because we all own a piece of the rock here. So we've had all, $2.8 million, and there's, I think 10 different projects. Let's see, the Caroline restoration is nearly complete. We're already enjoying that. It was playing yesterday. Our friend Lee Leach was playing yesterday, and he'll be playing again on Monday. Norwood has just completed a pool study, so those funds came from CPA. Murphy Field they've done a great job of resurfacing the basketball court at Murphy Field on Pleasant Street. The Morse House feasibility, I won't go through all these, but Old Parish Cemetery. So some of these projects that have already been approved by town meeting, they will absolutely lead to a next phase. So it's phase 1 is let's do a study of the pools or the Old Parish Cemetery. So that group has completed their reviews. We actually, at our last meeting, a presentation was made to us of the results of the Old Parish Cemetery study, which again leads to it will likely lead to phase 2. Lower Belch, I mentioned the Elliott Field. So, and the restoration, one of our first project, actually the first project that town meeting approved, was the restoration of St. Gabriel's Chapel. So all of these things, pretty much none of these things would have been done due to Proposition 2.5 and the restrictions, the competing demands and the restrictions from other, schools and et cetera. So pretty much all of these things have been accomplished or they're underway as a result of you all voting for them. it was mentioned early that spending to date, so out of that list that we just saw, there's a big goose egg next to housing, and we're trying to remedy that. But so far, nothing has come forward. No projects have come to the committee, nor have we passed on any projects relative to housing until now. So this is truly like the beginning of something really good. Open space and historic, you can see pretty much a 50-50 split. That those projects have been presented to us at an even pace. But no, housing is, we're hoping housing catches up. So because it is a pie that we want to kind of fund all aspects of it to make our community a better place. That's the goal. I'm sorry, real briefly, projects nearing completion. So we're just about done with the Carillon on the Alviso Park, which is next to the Big Y on Endicott Street. That pavilion was proposed, approved, and has been created. They're in the final tweaks of that. I go by there periodically, and people are using it almost every day. Holly?
I just wanted to, the DPW did that stamped concrete base that you see, which is similar to the cost savings that will be achieved for the Sturgeon Elliott Park, where they're doing that stamped concrete in-house. So that was really awesome.
Good, thank you. That's an area that's likewise managed by the Conservation Commission. Next slide is Murphy Field. I mentioned the Old Parish Cemetery Master Plan has now been completed, so that's under review, and that group is trying to figure out, okay, what do we do next? And then as I mentioned before, the Saint Street lot was purchased through CPA money. So we already looked at this, so
Okay,
we're starting. Sorry.
I wanted to ask about the budgeted reserve and undesignated reserve.
Yep.
What are those two?
So, and again, the state defines these buckets, if you will, the reserves. When money, you might not be able to see this, but when the revenue comes into the town in the first year, so where Article 6 proposes the acceptance of just about $1 million. There is a formula that says it has to go to only five places. Budgeted reserve, because this revenue is forecasted, like the town treasurer has determined next year's revenue will be a certain amount of tax revenue. It's not exact, because you've got abatements, you've got people building additions to their homes, so more taxes will come in that case, but abatements, less tax will come in. So they call it a budgeted reserve because it's a budget. We don't actually have that money, nor is it an exact number. So in year one, the budgeted reserve money, it basically accumulates in that budgeted reserve column. And then the undesignated is everything that wasn't spent in previous years rolls into the undesignated fund.
That's the 65%.
That's the 65%, right?
Okay, so
Yep.
the budgeted reserve.
I'm sorry, the 65% is the budgeted, right? You could see the $667,000. I don't know if you can see that or not, but so the revenue that's coming in FY23, nothing goes into undesignated, it all goes into budgeted reserve. So right now in the budgeted reserve, there's $850,000. Next year, there'll be another $600,000+ to bring us up to 1.5 million.
All right, so, oh boy, I don't understand. So there's the community, historic, open space.
Mhm.
There's the undesignated amount, the 65%, and then there's the 5%.
Right.
So I'm not seeing that up there either. So I'm just very confused about this budgeted. So
Yep. So if you think of the undesignated, at the beginning, one of the first slides is we showed the slice of the pies and where the money goes. The unbudgeted, thank you. So the undesignated basically means these are funds that are under the control of the CPA. They're under the control of the CPA. They can't go anywhere until town meeting approves the spending of those. In either a project form or administrative expenses, but the undesignated funds can be used to supplement any project out of the other categories, housing, historic, and open space. The like the state was most focused on the 10%,
Right.
if you will. But they said there's additional money that the town municipality sets the priorities and determines how to spend that money. But so it's kind of utility, I'll say, utility money that can be spent in any of those three ways.
One way I might be able to explain
Where
it
is
is,
that on the other slide? Where's the 65% on the other slide?
Yep, so on the 65, the 600, that $667,000 is right here. It's going into the budgeted reserve. It looks like we probably mislabeled one of those.
Yeah, and what is
Yep.
an undesignated? See, okay, so that's that. Is the undesignated reserve what they
So
think will come in this year?
No, it's what they've already.
think of it as what's left. So this might be an easier way to explain it. Joe, let me know if I'm accurate. So every year this goes into a fund.
Yeah.
This goes into a fund, this goes into a
Very
fund,
clear.
this goes into a fund.
Right.
Now, the following year, you have a historic fund, you have a housing fund, you have an open space recreation fund. This is just called something different. It doesn't close out to the general fund.
Right. But on that other chart, which column is it?
So with that first slide, the pie slice should be labeled budgeted reserve. So initially,
Okay, so that's the budget.
the money, but I think there might have been a small u instead of a capital U. It's undesignated, meaning it hasn't gone to those pie slices.
That much
Yep.
I understand.
Yep.
Then what's the undesignated?
So at the end of every year, what should happen, and we're in the middle of the year, so this hasn't occurred yet, but the budgeted reserve again it's a forecasted amount that's coming in new revenue.
Is that
So
the undesignated reserve that's a forecasted amount? Because you just told me the budgeted reserve was the 65%.
Right. So the budgeted reserve is the forecast of what will come in next year in revenue. And at the end of each year, that money, whatever's left in that budgeted reserve account should be swept into the undesignated account. So so it's only because of where we are in the year. Like at the beginning, if we said as of 12/01 on July 1st of 2022, this amount, the 1.5 million, will be moved essentially into the undesignated. And the new money for the new year will then fill the budgeted reserve account. So there's two steps. The new money goes into budgeted reserve. And then at the end of that year, whatever's left in that budgeted reserve account will then jump over be reclassed into the undesignated. Both of the pools are available for CPA use. But they're just, year one versus future years. So
yeah, I was going to help out. Hi, everybody. So I actually just learned this distinction myself a few days ago because I was like, oh, it's the same question you had. I think Joe just did a great job of explaining it. One thing I can mention too, and I was going to mention about sweeping at the end of the year, it sweeps to undesignated reserve. But if you notice, the Cooper Park is being paid out of old money because the new money isn't certified yet. We expect it to come in, but we can't bank on it yet because things might change. So the 805 number we know is in the bank, and that's why it's on the undesignated reserve, because the end of last year's balance is actual money. We know it's there, and that sweeps to the undesignated reserve. And so that's why it's being assigned from that money and not out of the budgeted reserve, because that money is just a forecast, as Joe was saying. So it is a little nuanced. I totally get it. But that's why we set it up that way, so that the real money that we know is in the bank is in the undesignated reserve.
Clear as mud, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, go on. I don't want to waste any more time.
Okay. No, not a waste at all. Good question.
Not understanding this.
I can call you Monday, we can go over.
Yeah. Any other questions, comments, recommendations? One thing we're always trying to foster is like new projects. One of the things that we can't, like if somebody said, what are the next 3 years going to look like as far as CPA is concerned? I'm not excited to say we don't know, because we're not the ones that are proposing projects and kind of building the pipeline. That has to come from the community. So we're always trying to, if somebody says, I have an idea, those are the magic words, right? Because we can't propose a project, but we can help guide it through the process. And I've done this a lot, actually. I think all of us have done it. So Tony's done it himself, and Mike and Holly, and we all have done it. So So it's like, it's planting the seed of what's next. And if you think of that list of projects that have already been proposed, that's, anything's possible as long as it fits within those three categories. So, sorry this has gone so long, but all these are great questions.
Engaging discussion.
And next week, all these, regardless of which day this week you're coming forward, these mini town meeting sessions, the information sessions have been great. What everybody does, and I know we'll do this, is we'll come back and say, okay, how did that go? Questions asked, tweaking slides, whatever, rearranging slides in order wise. But I know speaking from the community, we do appreciate everybody's feedback. So thank you all. Thank you.
Just a comment.
Yeah.
I think the available funds should be presented first.
Reordering of the slides. Perfect. Yes. Yep. Amen. Yeah. Good.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you. Thank you all.
We're going to move on to the special town meeting warrant. And we're going to actually start at the end because I do have some folks who had to get on to a different event. So I want to take Article 10 quickly, then go into Article 9, let them move on to their event, and then we'll go back in reverse order because I guess we could always mix things up. So Article 10, which will be the last one on the annual town meeting warrant, on the special town meeting warrant, sorry, is unpaid bills. So what are unpaid bills? The town operates on a fiscal year, and our appropriations only run for that fiscal year. So anytime a bill is late, whether sometimes it could be us paying it late, somebody forgot to submit it, or sometimes a vendor gets it late, if we don't have it in by the middle of July, our fiscal year ends on June 30th, we no longer have a legal appropriation to pay the bill. We have to go back to town meeting to do it. Now, the origins of this in state law were to prevent cities and towns 40, 50 years ago from playing games with their budget, from saying, okay, I got a $3 million health insurance bill for this quarter, and we don't have any money. I want to go and do this. I'm just going to hold on to the bill and dump it into the new fiscal year. Great intention, great fiscal conservative management of municipal finances. How does it work in reality? Is the newspaper got us a $75 bill a couple of months late, so we have to wait 7 months until we go to town meeting and then pay the bill. I'll just go through these quickly. These are these two items here are legal bills as well as the Murphy-Hesse one. Lawyers are notorious for always wanting to get their bills in on time and then not remembering that they haven't completely billed us yet. No offense to the lawyers in the office, but again, they send that bill July 18th for something they did for us in June. It's passed, we got to hold it, and it's going to go forward. And sometimes there's a case that's carrying on or an item that happens to be carrying on. Some of these you'll notice very small items. I feel bad for Keedy Pest Control. Sometimes the invoice gets lost, it doesn't get sent. We have a legal obligation to pay the bills. The ARC is actually a nonprofit association that the town contributes $17,000 a year to pay for some of the services they provide to certain residents with differing abilities. And in the midst of COVID, there was just a problem. They sort of switched over and we switched over and the full amount didn't get paid. So we want to make sure we pay it. Most of these bills are items that were close to free cash. We didn't end up paying the bill. So it's not really new money. It would have otherwise come out of the budget. The bill just came late. Small charge from WB Mason. Again, that could be as simple as somebody said, oh, I got the invoice for my office orders, put it aside, and then time ran out. Legal fees. Wells Fargo, I believe, is a banking charge. And then Lexipol is it's a service we use at the fire department for standardizing policies according to Mass state law and national fire codes. They sometimes get us a bill late. We're not perfect. All of our human beings that work for the town are humans and they miss things and make mistakes. And just like any of you work for a business, you forget to send an invoice, we get it. And it's heck for us because we have to go through this process. Unpaid bills, interestingly enough, requires a 9/10 approval at town meeting. Again, the intention of the law, which is still good, was to make sure people couldn't play games with money and move money around and make things look good and everything. And unfortunately, all it results in is mostly smaller bills that we otherwise could have taken care of. Questions on the unpaid bills article? All right, moving on. Article 9, broadband distribution plant upgrade. Many of you know we operate our own broadband company here in Norwood, operated by Norwood Light. It is 20 years since we started our own broadband and cable division here in Norwood. The plant has reached the end of its initial lifespan, and it's now time to do the next expansion for the next 20 years, which is going to be a fiber to the home or fiber to the premises system. So that is an upgrade to the internet system we have in town. This is going to carry us for the next 20 years. Over the last 20 years, broadband has profited millions of dollars for the town. That all ends up flowing back in, usually to the general fund through free cash. It covers its costs. We'll hit a couple of years where we'll be paying the bond on this, where that profit number will go down a bit, but will remain profitable throughout the 20-year period. And this borrowing authorization will allow us to build out that system for the next 20 years. The costs are here. We are asking for $11.5 million for the borrowing authorization. We only actually believe we'll need $9.5 million, but under the state's laws, when we know the whole project's going to cost us $14.5 million, we have to get an authorization to go up to that amount. But our financials are based on only borrowing $9.5 million. Some dollars will come from depreciation. The difference of that 9.5 and 11.5 million is items we're going to pay out of capital as we build out the system. There's costs we would otherwise be incurring that we're not going to be repairing certain parts of the system. We would just be replacing it over time. And then this previous project borrowing authorization, sometimes we go to town meeting, we borrow a certain amount of money, and if it comes in under what we borrowed, we actually have to go back to town meeting to reauthorize that to an additional borrowing. So the net impact of that is no different than simply borrowing extra up here, but we actually can't just get rid of that extra borrowing and have it come in as cash. So if we borrowed $2 million for a project and it came in at 1.9, we don't get to spend that $100,000 on anything else. We just have to reauthorize it for another project. We have folks from Norwood Light here. If anyone has any question on the broadband build out. Sure.
I'm just curious, so are we going to have fiber coming to all of our homes? You're going to be doing that?
Yep. Daryl's our broadband manager. Yep.
Yeah. So we're actually just going to be doing, like, replacing the whole system.
You have a coax wire coming in now, it's going to be replaced with fiber optic.
How long is that going to take?
We're hoping between 5 years. We'll be in touch as it gets going.
Yeah.
Contact each section as we finish it.
And will it affect us in any way?
As little as possible. Unfortunately, the plan that we have there now will be able to keep running while we build out the new plan. So there should be very little interruption.
Great, thank you.
Questions on the broadband borrowing? Yep. Go ahead, Kevin.
Technical.
Sure.
Because the resource of broadband doesn't that pay for itself?
Oh, absolutely.
So it doesn't come out of any general or capital budgeting.
Absolutely. This is not tax dollars. These are broadband rate dollars. So even though town meeting members may not be a Norwood Light customer, I don't know why anyone wouldn't be a Norwood Light customer, this all comes out of broadband rate, so it doesn't impact your tax rate in any way. Great question. And Kevin Shaughnessy's the light department superintendent, and Daryl, our broadband superintendent, and Dan Morrissey, who's our chief operations officer at Norwood Light. Any questions? It's a big project, but it's a good project. We're excited about it. We are a successful municipal broadband company. We've been doing it great for 20 years, and we're looking to do it great for the next 20 years.
Yeah, we don't. Question about the build out?
Yeah, go right ahead.
When you said about having it in all of the homes, is this going to be an automatic thing, or will it be as you become a subscriber, then they'll add your fiber optics, or will this be like any utility where we schedule a day, they're going to come and do it?
So certainly existing customers will be automatically switched over. If you're not a customer now, instead of getting connected to the old plant, if our new plant is available, when you're signing up, you'll get the new plan.
We have about 3,500 customers, so we're the largest broadband provider in town, and then Comcast and Verizon are smaller than us in Norwood.
Well, we have about 5,000 customers, so Tony's right as far as video customers go, and that's really what we're talking about. So just a general overview. I was here, and Daryl was here too when we started 20 years ago. So when we decided to start, we thought about this. We thought about fiber to the home. Is it worth it? And we came very close to doing that. And then in the end, it really wasn't, someone the size of us, it really wasn't happening across the country that much. So we learned from other people, we're better off to stay with this hybrid fiber coax system, which is what we have now. However, we built out our fiber system well into the neighborhood. So we have about 250 nodes. We have fiber from our head end to these nodes. And it gives us the opportunity now to do what we wanted to do 20 years ago. And so we can do it at a little bit lower cost because of the money we spent up front. It's still a pretty big cost, as you can see, but we've been making operationally money for quite a few years, and we're pretty comfortable that we'll be able to do this successfully. So.
Question?
Oh,
About the larger middle unit, like Cox or Thomas, how will it work for that?
Well, we're not in all of the larger rental units. We try to get into almost, especially when they're being built, we try to get in at the ground floor. I'll let Daryl talk, 'cause I know we have some places now that we already have fiber into those places. Daryl?
Really, there's only a couple places that we don't, and that's Old Derby and
Windsor Gardens.
Windsor Gardens, yes. And that's, it's not that we didn't want to go in there, they didn't want to let us in. So in the future, that may change, but right now, those are the only two, major complexes that we don't serve.
And as Daryl said, the question for anyone at home is, are we going to be in all of the different larger complexes in town? And the answer is no. They have to let us in. They usually will sign a deal with one subscriber where they're either getting something at a discount or getting the rest of the discount or getting their costs covered. Questions on Article 9?
Question here, Tony.
Yep, go ahead.
So I put into the text, I was asking about the capacity of the fiber network. I know we built out stuff at the head end to do fiber handoff. But if this is meant to be a 10+ year, because we're saying 20 year on the fiber, longevity, what are we talking about for capacity in terms of bandwidth? How much pre-planning have we put into this? And do we have enough fiber already in place to deal with expanded demand? Because, I mean, right now, when you start talking fiber, I mean, it's very easy to say 100 megabit, but in 3 to 5 years, we may be talking gigabit into the house or 2.5 gigabit into the house. Or, 5 years down the line, we might actually be talking like 10 gig into the house.
Sure. So current technology will allow us to build a 10 gig capable system to each of the houses. Will we offer 10 gig initially? Probably not. We'll probably be, 1 or 2, maybe up to 5 initially, but it will have the capacity to go up to 10. And as far as the fiber in town, we can go even farther than that. It's just the technology right now isn't there. But we're, the industry is talking about 25 gig, 50 gig in not too distant future.
No, we have 25 and we have 40 right now. Talking 60 and 100 is under the IEEE at this point. And it has been ratified, but it hasn't been ratified for long distance. So that's why I asked the question on base capacity, because it's going to change very quickly when it does change. And we're already talking about multi-mode right now, because if you buy any switches right now, trying to find something traditional is practically impossible. I mean, everything is multi-mode. So you're talking 1, 2.5, 5, and 10 gigabit, for the most part. And that's really that's what everybody's focused on manufacturing at this point. So that's why I asked the question.
Sure. So I was speaking towards customer premise equipment, the equipment that we use to get from us to the customer. Current technology is at about 10 gig. But you're right, our plant, and as the equipment comes out that we can put in customers' homes that'll go higher, we'll be buying it.
So what's the expectation for fiber starting at the home? And what do we have for commercial, honestly?
Sure. Commercially, we can go above and beyond 10 gig currently. The direct fiber to the business, we can certainly go above 10. That's a different customer premise equipment. Sounds like you're pretty well educated in this. So that would just depend on the optics that we put on either end of that fiber and the switches that they support and routers. So that we can do currently. The customer premise equipment that we'll launch with will be 10 gig capable.
And a clarification, if I can, is this asymmetric or symmetric bandwidth?
Symmetric.
Well, that sounds very good. That actually sounds very, very good. Thank you for the information.
We're pretty excited about it.
If we've made Ed happy, we know we can make anyone happy. Thank you, Ed. Just a couple quick questions on the in the chat here. Pat had asked what are depreciation funds and where they live in the town's budget. And Meg, our finance director, answered depreciation funds are separate funds in the general ledger each year. NLD and broadband transfer to these funds. They're intended for capital expenditures. So we fully fund the depreciate, or we fund a certain amount we're required legally in the light department, and we do it by choice on the water sewer. It's funding the depreciated value of your plant, your equipment. We don't do it for water and sewer, but some communities actually do it for water and sewer. Neither here nor there. It's just a different way of accounting, but great question. And thank you, Meg. Further questions on Article 9? All right. Thank you, gentlemen. We'll move on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Joe, can you re-click me in something? All right. Article 8 is just the acquisition of an easement for the Westover Parkway Bridge. We are replacing the bridge, and we do need an easement, which is just called a property right or an access for property. Easements are property. Only town meeting can authorize us to do this. So to complete the bridge project, we do need to acquire an easement, and the cost is estimated to be at $5,000.
Someone own that property?
The Brierly family.
Oh, okay.
I think it's in the yellow sheet, the actual property that it's at. So this is not an uncommon action of town meeting where every other year, we got to come in, we need a little bit of an easement. And because only town meeting can authorize it, we have to come to town meeting. Question in the back?
This is for construction. Will it also include a permanent, maintenance, repair, et cetera?
Yeah.
Easement? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Mr. Brody?
Yeah, why does that bridge have to be repaired, please?
So in general, most bridges in the state are in poor condition or worse. So we try to go through every chance we get when we can identify a bridge, identify a funding source, and replace the bridges or replace the culverts. Does that answer the question, or?
Well, it seems in good condition.
They always look like they're in good condition, but as you can see, it was built in 1935 and it's severely deteriorated. I like to just generally use the term poor. So the bridge is approaching 100 years old. Remember that the surface of the bridge that you see is just a skim coat. That's just our pavement. I could keep that looking beautiful all year long, and that has nothing to do with the actual condition of the bridge.
Well, where's the problem?
In the actual structure of the bridge. Does that answer it? So remember, what you see on top of the bridge has nothing to do with the condition of it. The bridge itself is aging, which means that the concrete is starting to fail. You're starting to see chipping. And as that deteriorates, it runs the risk of it causing a critical failure in the bridge, where you might see a separation where it ends up having a crack. You might see, there's a different term for it, when it differentiates one side or the other. That would cause serious damage to the bridge. And because they take so long to repair and replace, if you don't get it before you have a critical failure, you could close a road 6 months, a year to have to get it done.
How long will this project take?
I'd have to double check with the DPW, but we're probably looking at, anytime you're looking at a bridge, it's 6 months to a year. That doesn't mean it's going to be fully closed for that amount of time, but bridge work is very complicated. The Dean Street Bridge we did 2 years ago, I want to say that was about an 8-month project, all in. Again, the road wasn't closed the entire time. It was closed for enough of time. And there's some bridges we simply can't close. And I believe this project was approved at town meeting, I think, a year ago. This is just for the easement that's needed. Other questions on the Westover Parkway easement? All right. Article 7, Water Sewer Enterprise Fund. So this is just a change to our accounting practices. This will allow us to establish what's known as a Water Sewer Enterprise Fund. It's not really a separate fund that we want to put money into. It's just an accounting process to have all of our water and sewer expenses and revenues come out of one single fund. Some of you who were here earlier in the week had me talk about the move to enterprise funds. It's really just considered a best practice in municipal finance and budget management. It makes sure that our water sewer fund and our water sewer bills pay for all of our water sewer expenses, and that they're not paying for property tax expenses, or vice versa, that your property taxes aren't being used to pay for water sewer expenses. Has no impact on the operations or the rate. It's just an accounting change. And the light department operates this way. Light department money is its own bucket. This makes sure that water sewer money is its own bucket. Carol?
Sorry to do this. I'm sorry I wasn't at earlier meetings.
No worries.
Do we have other enterprise funds?
We do not. So Norwood is a little unique that we don't generally practice enterprise fund accounting. It's funny, about a year ago when we were interviewing finance director finalists, We interviewed about 9 people, and every single one of them said, can you explain why you don't do enterprise funds? And our response was, we're getting there. We've always just thrown everything into one bucket, and it's not a best practice. It's not even really a good practice. About 5 years ago, the DOR sat down with me and said, you are the only town that does it this way, and you really need to start trying to just separate it out from an accounting standpoint. Now, the light department isn't an enterprise fund because it operates under a separate statute of laws, but it does, we've moved it, it is its own sort of fund over here. And we cost our revenue and expenses more or less from an accounting standpoint to one fund for water and sewer, but it's just making sure all those costs and revenues are in one bucket. And if there's anything left, they get used to pay for water and sewer funds. If you think about, if you had like a side gig, so if you run a little business on the side and you keep a separate checking account for your little business on the side, so you're not inadvertently taking money to that to pay your mortgage or taking money from your day job and putting it over there, that's all it really is.
So there's actually a separate checking account for the cemetery?
That's how I'd explain it that way, yeah.
Is there physically a separate checking account?
No, it's not physically,
Yeah,
but
okay.
conceptually, that's the way to think of it. All its money goes in and out of its own little fund. It'll help, there's a couple other benefits to it. I mean, from an accounting standpoint, accountants like things to be neat and clean and organized, and that's always a good thing. And the accountants tend to love things like that. But it'll help us with our financial projections going forward. One of the challenges we had with the operational override, trying to look at our expenses and revenues out over 5 or 10 years, water and sewer is not necessarily relevant to the town budget, how we fund police and fire and public works. Same thing with the light department. When we first were doing our projections out, you know, we kept having this year where all of a sudden, like, it seemed like the town had a bunch of money and we had to dig into it. And what it was is a bond came off on the light department side. Well, we don't get that money. It just means that the light department's paid off that bond. So being able to sort of pull water and sewer out and throw it over there and pull the light department out and put it over there, we can really look at the money that comes in for our municipal services and the money that goes out for our municipal services and project out where we'll be able to go. Same thing with water and sewer rates and with electric.
Why isn't the electric an enterprise fund?
So it operates the same way as an enterprise fund, but under MGL 164, light departments are their own statutory fund. It's the same thing, they're just legally their own, called something different. Any other state in the union, it would be an enterprise fund. Massachusetts, it's a Chapter 164 fund, which is effectively the same thing. It'll also, at the end of the year, we have multiple ends of the year. In October, before we go to set the tax rate, we actually submit what's known as our tax rate recapitulation sheet to the state. And it's just sort of a listing of all of our revenues and expenses, how everything comes in. And it's got a balance, and that's ultimately what determines what the tax rate is. I mean, yes, it's our spending and it's our revenue. We're the only town that includes our light department on that tax rate recap sheet. So the DOR every year is just like, what are you people doing? And this doesn't make sense. And we always have to explain it to them, because the biggest cost in the light department budget is that purchase power. And that going up or down isn't the same as things going up and down somewhere else. That might go up $5 million. Well, it could mean that power went up. It could mean we're selling more power, which means we're actually going to make more money. So the state would be like, how is your budget going up that much? And we'd have to say, well, we had this new business move into town. Or we would sign a contract for a smaller amount, or the rate would go down and they would say your budget's going down. So it screws up all of our municipal calculations. By finally pulling it out and throwing it over here and throwing water and sewer over there, we'll have better, clear cost and revenue analysis for both those funds and all of our regular expenses.
Are there any others that you might pull out to?
So the airport is done as an enterprise fund in some communities. We might eventually want to get there. We sort of want to, water and sewer, we have to do it. The airport generally profits a little bit each year. So I know Mansfield runs theirs as an enterprise fund. So that way it's a business. It's supposed to generate revenue to cover its costs, put it sort of to its own separate little fund off to the side. And we'll have one single fund. This is a question I got, and some towns have a whole separate water fund and a separate sewer fund. We don't own any treatment plants on either end. We're a member of the MWRA. So usually you have a water or sewer fund separately if maybe only 60% of your community is on sewer. And that way you cost it separately and you treat it separately. We're 100% water and sewer for everyone, and MWRA treats the water and the sewage. Question on Article 7? Plugging right along. Article 6, school IT capital requests. The school, due to their grant cycle, they're able to get a significant amount of money for IT related items, and they just have to get their appropriation a little bit differently than the rest of the capital process. Total request is going to replace the 3 school network switches, 33 wireless access points, and 2 network firewalls. At some point in time, we'd like to build a base amount of money in the budget for school and town capital for IT, because these are not big capital expenses. They're recurring expenses, but they're hard to fit into the operating budget. We actually currently have $775,000 in the budget for vehicles that are part of our rolling stock, where we know to maintain our fleets, we have to replace a certain number of vehicles. We'd like to get there with IT, but again, every year you got to find the flexibility in the budget, and that would simplify IT purchases a little bit. Questions on the school IT request? Article 5, retiree COLA increase. The retirement board is asking that the retiree COLA base be increased from $14,000 to $15,000. What that means is when our retirees get an increase in their pension, it's actually only on the first $14,000 and by their proposal $15,000 of their pension. So if your pension is $60,000 and you get a 3% COLA, it's only on the first $14,000. That's how the state has the pension system set up. We don't really have much control over that, other than town meeting can allow us to make some of these increases on the retirement board. The retirement fund and the retirement board themselves are technically separate entities from the town. We pay into it, but once we've cut our check, if you will, that is its own board that manages the funds according to state law. Questions?
Yeah. I believe we are a part of PARAC already.
So PARAC is the state's authority that oversees pension systems. We're not part of, I don't believe we're part of PRIT, which is a state retirement fund. We are at 80% funded. We're our own retirement boards. There's some county systems and larger systems. We've done very well, and we just want to continue doing very well. There's a county system that's probably the county itself and 15 communities in the county. I think they're like 55% funded. We're 80% funded, which for all intents and purposes is fully funded, but we're in a good place.
But at one time, we were 100%.
Correct, we were. And what that means is your actuaries will tell you that you are 100% funded in your pension system, but it's based on the market value of your assets. Markets can go up and down. Questions on the retiree COLA increase? All right. Article 4 is the Forbes Hill surplus. So as most folks know, we sold the Forbes Hill property after acquiring it several years ago. We were fortunate that at the end of the day, we netted a surplus from the property. I like to use the expression that if you ever drove home drunk, which you should never do, but if you ever drove home drunk and you got home safely, it was still not a wise idea to drive home drunk. Forbes Hill did work out very well for the town. That was certainly not the intention. We are fortunate and blessed in Norwood that it did, but it just as easily could have worked out poorly. I think several years ago, town meeting authorized the town to resell it at up to a $2 million loss. But the town bought the property ostensibly to keep out housing development, that there's no housing development going in there. We later sold the property and ended up with quite a surplus for it. I think we're missing part of the slide here. Top part. So there'll be, we're looking to allocate the money to 3 areas because it is really one-time money. The biggest chunk, 6.2 million, would be placed into a special purpose stabilization fund for open space, which will be created by the motion at town meeting. We have an open space and recreation plan. Most communities do. The #1 goal on that plan is always acquire open space. So we've been working on that for the last several years. We think we've identified the potential to purchase some of the parcels that are on that open space list. They're not necessarily ready to sell anything at this point in time. So we're saying, let's take this money, put it aside, and we will have it if next year or in 2 years or 3 years, we have the opportunity to acquire some open space. We are going to look at the Kofsky Farm, which is a 25-acre parcel in Norwood. We've had a lot of discussions with them. It's top on the list of the open space and recreation plan that residents developed. They're not ready to move forward yet, so we want to put some money aside saying, well, we didn't get any open space at Forbes Hill. Let's put it aside and finally have a chance to acquire some open space. Maybe it's that parcel, maybe it's a different one. We still have to come back to town meeting to take any money out of that fund and also to purchase a property. So this is just putting it aside saying, it's over here for open space in the future. So any concerns that, could we go buy a fire engine with it? That all has to go back to town meeting, as well as a separate property acquisition. We'd have to come and say, this is the parcel we want to buy, this is what the cost is, etc. The remainder of the funds, $2 million into our override stabilization fund. We established this after passing the operational override to make sure we built up a little bit of money to provide some budgetary stability for in the outer years of the override. We figured since some of the money did come out of the town's operating budget to fund Forbes Hill during its operations, this will eventually make its way back into the operating budget, sort of making the town whole. And then with what was left, the about $1.9 million, just putting it into our regular stabilization fund. It's always good when you have some one-time money to just put a little bit of it in the bank for future use. Question, Kate?
Who gave the town the right or first refusal?
The Koski Farm. I should say they verbally communicated that to them. They could always turn and sell to a developer.
Where is this
Steve?
Koski farm place?
Do we have a map that you can pull up? Oh, sorry, get Joe's way. We'll show you the. So this is, ooh, sorry, scroll down a little bit. So here's Neponset Street coming to the interchange. It's this parcel right here. This is all wetlands here. So the airport ends here. This is all wetlands. This is other open space. It's Holly, is Holly still here? No, Holly could tell you the exact sale of, but this is all state protected land that the town has right around here. And then this would be the Koski Farm. So when you look at the ability for it to connect into here and the ability for the 20 or so acres into here, the ability to create some walking trails, some really great passive recreation opportunities. I don't think the town would ever be able to build anything here. There's a little bit of wetlands on it. They've looked at designs for that parcel. They could fit 25 or 30 houses in there. For a municipal purpose, we probably couldn't build anything given where the wetlands are. We tend to only build big buildings when you think about it. I mean, you might have a shed, you might have a field house, something like that, but we wouldn't be able to put a fire station or elementary school in there.
Could you please orient us regarding the map? Because I know where the Cadillac place is, Neponset Street.
It's the other end.
This is the very far end. So this is Interstate 95. This is people in Canton over here.
Oh, okay, Interstate 90, oh, it's way, way, way down.
Way, way, way down, yep.
Interstate 95.
Just as you come off, just as you come
So
off.
Norwood must be, the town of Norwood must be where the green is.
We're all here. This is the Prescott.
Okay, I know where there's some manufacturing company and if you go over 95.
I think you're thinking of the different roundabout. You're thinking of the roundabout for Route 1. This is I-95. Can we put it into the internet?
If you go off 95,
We can pull up.
onto Street, going to
Onto
Norwood.
Street by Canton.
Yeah.
Okay, 90.
So maybe pull up the town. We can kind of walk from Town Hall.
It's further down. It's almost near Canton.
Okay. Map allows.
Oh, near that old, near that old airport.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so if it crosses over and just before you get it,
Into
cross over
Norwood.
95.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So-
You go over the highway, over on the left.
On the right, that,
Yeah.
that leads to the concert, yeah, okay.
Here's-
95 in that wetland.
Yep, all in here. If this map, I don't know if it helps it any better, but Town Hall is here. You go through the little roundabout, Route 1's here, and then you keep heading down to Ponset Street, and this is where you would get on Interstate 95 or cross into Canton. So it's roughly right about here. The airport's up there, but that's a little bit further down. So it's this area in here, about 25 acres.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
That little thing didn't look like 25 acres.
Yeah, it never does.
This,
No, this side of the highway. Our side of the highway. It's on
If
the
you go
north.
left to the highway, then, the driving of the little park. From the north to the- before you go.
It's near where Ernie Patrickowski lives, if that helps anyone.
I know, it's right next to his house.
Yeah. Rachel, you had a question?
Yeah, just if you could expand on the impact to the override stabilization fund. So it looks like this is functionally going to slightly more than double the amount that's in the override stabilization fund. Where are we in the balance as far as, are we drawing down on that fund yet?
Not yet. We're actually ahead of schedule. And given that we had a giant, ahead of schedule in a good way, given that we had a pandemic in the middle of all of our preparations and everything else, we've done pretty well. This fiscal year that we're going into, we were anticipating drawing down about $350,000 from the override stabilization fund. We're drawing down nothing. Last year, we were supposed to neither put anything in or take anything out, and we were able to put about $700,000 in. The first year, we were able to do an additional $500,000 in that the school department didn't need. So we're getting well ahead of that schedule, which means that next year, our original projection was we'd have to take $700,000 out of the override stabilization fund. Now, that might end up being that it goes up more and we need to take more out, but we have more in there. Or best case scenario, we don't need to dip into it at all, and hopefully it'll provide us with additional years of fiscal stability. We base the override on 5 years of stability. We know we will get through 5 years without any serious budget issues. Years 6 and 7, there's not all of a sudden a collapse or a drop off, but it looks like we'll have resources to get into year 6, year 7. And then if we have to look at maybe the budget gets tighter, maybe we do need to use some free cash or some stabilization so we can take that 5-year override. The goal's best case scenario, maybe we stretch it out to 10, given how the economy is doing, which we don't really know for sure.
So I just want to reiterate that the promise was at least 5 years,
Yep.
the stabilization fund, and your guesstimate right now with this additional money that's going in, we're probably going to get at least a couple years out of it, but we might even be able to double the, projected time that we can draw on the stabilization fund before there would be any consideration of any additional override. So
Correct.
really extending the time. I just want to drive the point home.
Absolutely, we're
Extending
doing
the time here.
we're doing very well, and we are well ahead of schedule. I always caveat that with we don't know what the economy is going to do, but we're plugging along very, very well. I'd say we're in a good position. The regular stabilization fund, not that we want to have to go into a budget year and take money out of stabilization, that can impact your credit rating, but we're doing well with free cash. We'll have over $10 million in stabilization. We will have $5 million in override stabilization. We have resources that could get us through, not only to extend the override, but to get us through a couple of hard years of a recession. I was talking with somebody who works in Weymouth the other day, and they never really recovered from the 2008 recession. We were able to recover, and we have built up our fund balances, and we've been making solid investments in our infrastructure too. And all that is to say is we've sort of ridden the upride in the economy well, that if we have to pause or we have to cut back for a period of time, we're well positioned to do so. And next year, maybe we need $1 million out of it, and that's it. And then the year after that, we need $2.5 million out of it. And then the year after that, we need $1.5 million. And we're saying, wow, this easily got us through 8 years as opposed to 5. Questions on Forbes Hill? Surplus, I should call it. Hopefully, I'm very much looking for this vote, because then it sort of puts the saga of Forbes Hill behind us once and for all. Never to be spoken of again. We won't preserve the town report from those years. Article 3 is just a small financial transfer. At the time we built the last DPW fund, there was money in a sinking fund, the last DPW building, sorry. There was money left in a sinking fund, which was just money put aside for the project. There was about $160,000 left. We were going to close out a few years ago, but there was a little litigation among the some of the contractors and subcontractors of that project. We wanted to wait until a couple of years after that had passed. It's now passed. We don't believe that there's any threat of litigation there. So we don't need this fund anymore. The proposal is just close it out, but put it into our regular stabilization fund. Article 2 is 3 free cash appropriations. So free cash is sort of our surplus revenue. I'll take them in reverse order. The school department, this is just to correct funds that the schools had received that were closed out. So what happens at the end of the year is there's a sort of a massive accounting of everything that happens. And sometimes we receive money for a project and it gets closed out to the general fund, meaning that they weren't able to spend that money. It didn't get lost, it just went into free cash. We tend to be fairly conservative. If we're not sure why there's an appropriation or why there's money somewhere, it's always better to say, close it out, and we can fix it later rather than let appropriations sit out there and funds sit out there. So the schools did lose an opportunity to spend about $60,000 in grant funding from a prior fiscal year. It's been identified. We're just allocating it back to them for some school IT projects, separate from their regular capital appropriation. These two appropriations here, the fire department and the police department, these would be for next fiscal year. They're above and beyond the normal budget for the purpose of dealing with the hospital closure. We're experiencing some significant cost increases, certainly significant wearing on our men and women in Norwood Fire and Norwood Police for the additional travel time, but it's also wreaking havoc on our equipment, on our overtime, and vehicles in particular. So the police department, obviously, they don't have to travel out of town as much, but there is an added overtime cost when they have to go and travel to Boston or Brockton or wherever there happens to be a client of theirs in a need. A little bit of additional fuel costs for them and a little bit of additional vehicle maintenance for them, but not nearly as significant as the fire department, where our ambulance service is now traveling to Needham and Boston every day. We want to cost this out separately so we can better keep track of our costs related to the hospital closure. Perhaps there's a way we can recover them down the road somewhere. The fire department side, mechanic work, this will actually pay for either additional garage service, or we sometimes use temporary mechanics help because the vehicles are getting beat up. I mean, if you think about an ambulance that was able to travel a mile to your house and then a mile to Norwood Hospital and then a mile back is now traveling a mile to your house and 15 miles and then 15 miles back. We need the additional mechanic help. We need additional supplies and services, oil, gasoline. Tires are getting replaced 3 times as often as we have to replace them. We squeezed through this year. We did get an appropriation from the state of about $70,000 to help us there, but we need these funds next year for vehicle, fuel, mechanic services, a little bit of overtime. Again, it's hard. Previously, if your shift was off at 8:30, you could go on an ambulance run, drop somebody off at the hospital, and then be back at 8:20. That's not happening now where you're going into Boston or to Needham or somewhere else. We will probably come to town meeting next year with a similar request. And the following year, assuming the hospital is on schedule, that might be the last year, we'll adjust these numbers throughout time and say, okay, well, what are we really spending? What do we think we really need? This is really to get us through the year. I will tell you, we're probably going to have to replace ambulances ahead of schedule. Good ambulances, $400,000 or $500,000, but the additional wear and tear on them is going to probably mean we're going to have to be replacing them ahead of schedule. The fire engines are getting a wear and tear. A fire engine generally lasts 20 years. They're being called out a little bit more. They're not necessarily having to travel further, but they are being utilized a little bit more. Questions on these appropriations?
Is it time for the municipal government to look for consolidating our fleet operations?
Yeah, we're actually
as repair facilities?
Yeah, we're actually doing a study internally. So what Mr. Conley is referring to is the DPW repairs DPW vehicles. We have 1 temporary fire mechanic that focus on fire mechanics. The police fleet, the school transportation fleet, and some of our other small fleets tend to get subbed out. We're looking at whether it would make sense to have a central fleet maintenance process. And it may be as simple as just having 1 or 2 vendors that we use. We're doing the analysis now to look at the money and look at where it's spent. It's one of those things that on paper would probably make sense to do, except we don't have a single facility that could treat everything. We might be able to move police vehicles and have them done at the DPW. We may not have the mechanic time. We may not have the space. The fire department could use its own separate garage facility, if you will, to maintain the trucks and ambulances. But now you're looking at millions of dollars of an acquisition cost, and where do you put that? So, but we're going to do that analysis and see what we can do and see if there's a way we could centralize fleet maintenance and if it would make sense. And it might ultimately make sense. But if we've got to build a $20 million facility, it might not make sense to have to build that facility. But we want to do that analysis and sort of see where we are and if we can squeeze any efficiencies out of our overall fleet maintenance program.
As well as the school fleet.
Yep, the school buses are contracted out, and the school special ed transportation fleet we own and maintain in-house. Article 1 is our closeout of the year article, our internal transfers. So the school budget, school committee has what we call bottom line budget authority. So they can move items anywhere within their budget. If they're short salaries at the press cop, but they've got extra salaries at the high school, they're able to just make those transfers themselves. On the town side, the way municipal finance law works, we're not able to. So at the end of the year, any money we need to move significantly between any budgets, we have to go to town meeting and ask to move that money around. You'll notice some of these costs here end up being what we call a buyout. People don't get large buyouts, but people do have accumulated sick and vacation time. Sometimes they're employees who've worked for us 20, 30, 40 years. Other times it's just moving money around in the budget. What we first do is we try to identify, make sure this dollar amount is available elsewhere in the general government budget so that we're not sort of going over our budget allocation. And then once we're aware that it's there, we look at there's one budget line we can move money from to make things easier rather than have accounting making 275 different journal entries and taking $18 from the clerk's office, $20 from here. We're fortunate that we have some available funds left in the debt service budget. And the reason we end up having money left in the debt service budget is it's always a projection every year. Our financial advisors tend to be fairly conservative in what they think we're going to have to pay. Until we go out to bond for a project, we don't actually know what the interest rate is going to be. And then we only borrow funds for projects when we're actually beginning them. So if town meeting in October says, here's $2 million to pay for a new roof on a building, we don't the next day go to the bank and say, can we borrow $2 million and start making that payment? It sometimes could be 6 months down the road, sometimes could be a year down the road or longer, depending on how the project's going. And we'll also only borrow in the chunks that we need. So sometimes if there's $1 million for engineering and design, we may borrow the first $200,000 and then we don't actually borrow the rest until we need it. So sometimes that means that there's flexibility in the debt service line. In this case, it was a fair amount of flexibility in the debt service line, which was a big relief to us. The only caveat is we've been doing well with this the last several years with very low interest rates. As interest rates start to creep up, our borrowing costs will creep up, even though municipalities generally pay less than what you'll see out in the market. I do worry that, the year we have a projection where it's like, well, let's be conservative, project 3.25, and it comes in at 375, and it's, now we're coming to you saying the debt service line is over and we need to pull all these money from these town meeting lines. But these are just movements within the general government budget. Questions on Article 1? All right. I'd like to say save the best for last, but this is short of just bookkeeping. Carol, question?
No, I'm just looking.
Sure. All right. We have one. Why is waste removal $100,000 over budget? That's a great question, Pat. So again, any budget is always just a projection, right? It's an estimate of what you think you're going to spend. We pay waste removal based on the tonnage that actually gets removed from the community. We base it on an estimate, and sometimes there's more trash or there's less trash that actually comes out. We've seen an increase since COVID started, interestingly enough, in trash, but not in recycling. So we all get a little bit better there. But we pay per ton for every ton of waste that the town picks up from the trash barrels. And if people are throwing away more stuff, that number is going to go up. So we look at our 1 year, our 3 year, our 5 year. We're always looking at our averages and making a projection based on what we think we're going to remove. But similar to water or sewer, we can't perfectly predict exactly what anyone is going to utilize for waste in any given year. Anytime you can divert things from the waste stream, and that means things like food composting, I don't mean just throwing it in your neighbor's yard, that always saves the town money because we pay per ton for all the trash and recycling that we take out of the community. We're entering the last year of our waste management contract. We're anticipating some significant increases the following year. We had a provision in our contract that recycling would not exceed the cost of trash. And when we signed the contract, nobody thought that would be a problem. It's worked out wonderfully for us. It's not worked out that well for waste management. So I expect they'll attempt to recoup some of those costs in that next contract, as well as there's general increases in the cost of waste removal. So the more you can recycle, even though we actually pay the same for recycling and trash, recycling is always good. Reducing and reusing is even better. Food waste is a significant portion of what we end up having in our waste stream. So if you can do any at-home composting, and I know it's tough. I live by myself. I don't make enough food to be able to compost necessarily. I end up with little bags of a couple of rotting things, but anything you can do to compost is helpful. It all reduces it from the waste stream. Carol, and then we'll go to Rachel.
If in the next contract,
Yeah.
is there a possibility that recycle will be higher than, in that case, why should we recycle?
Because it's the right thing to do for the earth. We
Yeah,
do have
but, it seems like.
You're right. My concern is more, for us, we might say, well, okay, it's more, well, let's recycle. It then becomes hard for us to push recycling, right? So we're going to say, everyone recycle, even though it's just going to cost the town a lot more money and you're going to lose the service somewhere else.
Right.
Hopefully we can keep it at least close. The recycling markets had some crazy things happening where it jumped way up. It's settled a little bit. One of the biggest problems with single stream is the contamination rate. And we feel bad because every time we push, recycling rules, and I know it's complicated, right? You're always saying, is this pizza box good? Is this pizza box not good? What I feel like happens is we push good recycling habits, and those of you who clean out your spaghetti jars, you just go and you really, really clean them out with real hot water and soap. And the people that are throwing cat beds in their recycling and basketballs and stuff like that, they're still doing that. So it's tough, the people who separate out their paper and make sure it's accurate, and then we see basketballs and shoes and other stuff that people just sort of throw in the recycling. And it's like, there's no little recycling elves, that are going and like picking stuff out and saying, oh, look, I've gently used scooter. Let me go make sure somebody has this. It goes to a facility where it all goes into a machine and gets scanned and gets diverted and put all over. So there's no little recycling elves doing it. Every now and then people will throw things out they're not supposed to throw out. We more often recycle things we're not supposed to recycle. Mr. Hearn?
Have we ever thought about?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going
Sorry, Rachel.
Sorry, Rachel.
I just personally have my own homework. I just need to sign up for a composting service. But what thought has been given, considering that food waste is such a significant portion of the town's expense for trash? What thought has been given to maybe work with one of those organizations to just make it a little bit easier to get, and they not only take food waste, they take those pizza boxes that can't be recycled, they take lobster shells, they take like quite a lot of things that you wouldn't expect can be composted with these types of services. Have you been in communication at all about that?
Sure, we have. So before I get to the food waste, we had started partnering with a group that would do like textile recycling, and they were those pink bags, and they were going to come out. They were sort of growing and getting ready just as the pandemic hit, and then they ended up having to suspend service, and it kind of screwed their model up. I forget if it's called Black Earth or Green Earth or something. We've reached out to them. We don't meet their sort of demographics for being able to make it financially feasible for them to come to us and do it. We would love to be able to do it because anything we can divert is huge dollars we save. Probably 25% of that waste budget is food waste. So in the short of getting one of them, like if they would come in and do it, we do it in a heartbeat. What we have done is the DPW does have a couple of large compost bins. They have one right at their facility at Lyman Place that you can actually drive up and just throw it in there. I tend to use that one when I can. And I think they've got one or two other ones set up. We'd like to expand that, but then again, they are big bins of rotting food and stuff. So, we don't know if every neighborhood could use one and then we've got to go and collect it. But we're trying to do everything we can to do more of that composting. The schools have been great at in the school cafeterias and working at it. But the minute we could get them here, they have these little, it's funny, it looks like your regular trash bin, but they're only like 12 inches tall. They're the cutest little things. We'd love to have them here as soon as they'd be willing to come here.
Actually, I think Black Earth was the one that I was looking at. Is it just because there isn't, the capacity to have them come? Like, has there been any kind of like survey done?
The pre-pandemic conversation we had with them was that I think our demographics won't match the level of composting that makes it worth them to serve the whole community. And we can dig into that more with them, but they need to get a certain amount. They need to be able to do it. It works better in more urban, denser communities where they know they're going to get a certain amount and they can just go and do it. The bigger the suburb gets, the little bit more costly it is for them to be able to offer the service. I'd love to have them here. But great question. I'm sorry, Mr. Hearn.
Have we ever given any thought to setting up what some towns have in terms of a swap shed? Stuff that otherwise ends up in trash. I've been to the one out in Medfield. My daughter-in-law would trade the kids' toys in and get more, and a few months later bring them back, get something else. The one down in Bourne.
Bourne's great.
Tom McQuaid and I were there one day, and I'm like, wow, this is like a toy shop for adults. But there's all kinds of stuff for kids, adults, and everybody that gets thrown out.
Yeah, the shorter answer is we absolutely have. We have a little bit of a space issue up at the, I don't want to call it the dump, up at the landfill, where there's so much that goes on up there that, I know, I always feel bad when I say the dump, and it's usually actually Mark Ryan who's like, Tony, it's the landfill. Actually, he says it's the recycling center. It is our recycling center. It's not a dump, but we all call it the dump, right? There's a space issue, and building a shed is not a problem. Running a shed is not a problem. If you've gone there on a Saturday with those 700 to 1,000 people that go there, adding the swap shed would be challenging from a logistics standpoint, but I'd love to have one in town.
Somewhere else.
Could it be a different place?
Certainly could be. There becomes a little bit of a monitoring issue, but even then, if we could find a good space for one, it's a place that people have to be able to drive and to be able to go in. It has to be not secure, but reasonably secure. And we have a little bit of a space issue in Norwood. Those of you who have been in town a long time know it took us 20 years to decide to put the DPW facility right where the DPW facility's been since the 40s.
Yeah.
And part of that is just finding that space. But if there was ever folks who wanted to get together and look at it, we would love to have one somewhere in town. They're very useful. I've heard in the richer towns they're even nicer because people just sort of put like, brand new stuff there. So maybe I can get us all a membership to Wellesley's, but we would love to have one in town.
How big would it have to be? How big?
I've seen them. Some of them are not any bigger than like a good sized shed. It depends on what you want to fit into it and monitoring it.
Yeah, they have that little place, I think you're storing papers or something, that used to be the jail.
We're storing in the front part of that, we store election equipment. In the back store of that, we have old records and the sort of the lawnmowers and stuff for town hall. We've cleaned a lot of junk out of there, but we generally have a space issue in town. There's a lot of records that we have to keep in perpetuity. So we are drowning in records, and it seems like the more I throw out, the more we seem to find. And you keep thinking like we'll get a dumpster in and we'll clean out a couple of these rooms and it'll be great. And then I walk somewhere and then there's more stuff and then there's more stuff and then there's more stuff. And it's we have a bit of a space issue. That wouldn't be the worst area, but we store like the lawnmowers and stuff for town hall there. And the front of that building we haven't had power and water to that building in a long time.
Maybe as a follow-up to my other comment. Our facility, whatever we want to call it, I remember when it was really a dump.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We used it as a dump. But, yeah, we've given thought to whether it can be open more than on Saturdays. For some people, Saturdays doesn't work because they may be away or have other obligations. But also, would it maybe spread out, you know, the crowd that may be there in a given day? If we did develop something, more recycling, including swap sheds and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I actually proposed to the board, I think last year, that we, at least in the summer, open like maybe one night in the summer, like a Tuesday night or a Thursday night. For some reason at the time they were not interested in it. I would not mind bringing that back. I usually like to win votes when I'm asking for something, and I lost that one pretty resoundingly.
That idea, because there are people who may go away on the weekend, and what do they do with all their stuff? You know, their lawn stuff and the other stuff.
Absolutely. We do typically open it like after a big storm. We might do an extra couple of days. But I'd love, even if it was in the summer, like 1 or 2 weeknights, I'll tell you what, I'll put together a proposal and put it back in front of the board. And when you see it on their agenda, you can certainly write in letters of support, because I tried it once and got shot down.
Did they give you a reason why they didn't want to do that?
I think
Different board now.
Yeah, every now and then every board has to say no, just like every manager every now and then has to say no. And it's just, sorry, the fourth person in the office today, your request is a no. Maybe that's what it was. I mean, I'm sure there's some concern over the neighbors and, you know, people going there at night and you know, do we want the money, et cetera. But certainly worth looking at again. It's one of those things that sometimes you try and you don't win the first time or the second time, and maybe it takes the third or fourth time. Quick
Question.
Yeah, go ahead.
2 suggestions. We have the Savage Center, which right now is, the building itself is being used, I know, for some facilities, and we have parking out there, but we have the basketball court area that's not being used. If we wanted to do a swap shed, I mean, it seems like it would be fairly straightforward to do a minor expansion there for a little bit more parking and to drop a building into place. But you also have, you know, the field up next to the pool, which is right next to it. And you have the back access road, which actually goes down to a shed for the field. That also would only need a small amount of paving and a relatively small amount of parking to drop a swap shed into. So some things to consider.
Savage Center might be a great opportunity. That's actually a really good idea. There's a fair amount of space there. I mean, you always got to consider things that, you know, the Savage Center, by the way, this building over here. You know, is it accessible? How do we control it? Is it open all the time? Things like that. But there's some room on this parcel. That's a great suggestion, Ed. Question here from Brian: what are town departments doing systematically to reduce waste? So there's a number of things. We have a buy recycled policy, so we attempt to buy recycled paper and other recycled products when we are able to. We've been on municipal facilities. We've been installing a lot of LED lights. It's not really waste, but we're reducing water waste. We've been installing a lot of new faucets. We don't generate that much waste in a municipal building per se. The schools generate a fair amount of waste through the school cafeteria programs, for which they have some composting products. Other than the schools generating waste through the cafeterias, it's not waste, it's just kids who didn't eat their lunch. It's just part of sort of doing business. The average municipal facility doesn't generate that much waste other than some paper waste, which we recycle. If you think of the senior center here, there's a teeny bit of food waste from the food program, and then there's some paper. So we're not a big waste user. I believe about 65 grand a year is what the town spends for its waste removal at town and school facilities. So when you think about that, for how big and complex of an operation we are, we're not that big of a generator of waste other than food waste at the schools, but they don't want to make it waste. Sometimes kids don't like their lunch. What process items that would end up in the waste stream? Yeah, as I said, we do buy recycled, we recycle. We're not a big generator of waste as a municipal entity.
Could I add to the question or augment the question? Sure. Part of what I was thinking of were things, for example, I noticed that they switched the billing recently, which is nice. There's a little bit less paperwork there. To the extent that you can do things electronic, it means that paperwork's not generated on the other end that then we have to put in our recyclables or in our trash. You know, are there systems in place, or are departments being encouraged to think ahead like that? I think, for example, one of the things that I really like about the new billing system is we get those standard envelopes now. Whereas before the town had to pay to have them printed, they were separate. Then you have to pay to mail them, then you have to pay to sort them, then you have to pay to put them, when we put them in recyclables, because we don't use them because we have automatic bill. So I'm thinking, is there a way, for example, that, here's just one example. What if the light department said, we don't need to send out these envelopes to people that are getting their bills paid directly from their checking accounts. We can save money by not having to have the envelopes, and we save at the other end by those not ending up in recycling.
So two things on that. The new billing software, the light department will allow a e-bill option eventually. We're still looking to build that out. So like some of your other utilities, you'll be able to say, just email me my bill, and then there's no need for a paper bill whatsoever. On the other hand, I used to work in an area that had a lot of paper mills, and we want to reduce waste wherever we can, but paper is the most sustainable product that's out there. It comes from trees, goes back to the earth. Certainly we want to recycle it, but if there's one thing that's sustainable out there, it is paper, and I've seen the trees it comes from in places where they cut those trees down. Paper, but to your point, we do what we can do to reduce waste. You got to remember, we, as much as I'm all for online billing, and I don't want to ever have to write a check, we always maintain services for the entire community and have to serve everyone in the entire community. If we could e-bill everything and have everything be automatic and never have any paper processes, we'd love to. We started automating our permit process online. It's a complicated process. Once you roll it out, it takes you about a year or two to shake it down. Some of them have gone well. Some of them have had quite a few hiccups that we've got to go back in and make a few changes. But give a couple of years and virtually all of our processes in the town will be automated. There's still some of them, just the nature of the process will, by automated, I mean it should be electronic. Some of them are still going to require a manual process at some level, dump stickers and things like that. And one of the challenges with something like a dump sticker or your appliance sticker, we went through a period of time where everyone had a computer in their home and everyone had a printer in their home. And now people don't tend to have printers in their homes as much anymore. So even if you say, well, I'm going to email you something, you can print it and stick it on there. Now people don't have printers anymore. So, but great question. So a lot of good things to come from that new light department software. In a year or so, we'll probably have pay options at places like Norwood Bank or Dedham Savings Bank. We're going to look to establish a couple of payment kiosks out in town where you might be able to physically pay your bill, 12 hours a day, 14 hours a day, 24 hours a day. All part of sort of a long-term modernization that we're undergoing with a lot of our digital processes. But great question.
Tony, before the break, can I just remind everyone?
Madam Moderator, you are the boss.
For lunch, are you bringing lunch in?
We can go somewhere. I didn't know we'd go to noon.
We are going to start at 6:30. So 6:30 on Monday. Please try to get there earlier in order to check in, choose your seat and everything else. But we're kind of changing the practice, but we're going to get festivities underway right at 6:30 because we've got a lot of business to get through. So thank you in advance.
Thank you. Any final questions? All right, this is the last one. We'll see you Monday night, 6:30. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone who joined us on the chat or joined us remotely.
Hi, Tony.
Hey, Steve, how's it going?